process workshop. We're convening at 5 p.m. here. Mr. Roloff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to turn this over to Finance Director Van Gompel. The outline in our agenda is really talk about CIP structure, organization, and policy. The primary purpose is really to talk about geo debt and debt in general, because that's obviously a huge part of our capital improvement program. Department heads are here to talk about individual projects, if there are any questions regarding those. But this is meant to be a more high-level view. This is not approving the CIP budget. This is really taking a look at the plan, later on submit it to the Plan Commission for their concurrence with it being consistent with the comprehensive plan. And then we'll just talk about next steps, depending on how it goes tonight, if you want any additional workshops regarding CIPs. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Van Gompel.
Thank you, Mr. Roloff. Thank you to the City Council. We're trying a process a little bit different this year, and hopefully you will find this process to be very useful. So we're doing things a little bit differently. We've implemented a new capital improvement planning tool called Planet. It's a software database that keeps track of all the projects. I did not give you each individual project sheet. We certainly can do that, but as the city manager talked about, the purpose tonight is keep this at a high-level discussion on how we go forward. With your packet, you should have a series of schedules, basically 4 schedules. One is a department summary, that's just a total by department. Then there's a list of projects by department, and that would have the total cost for all projects regardless of how it's funded by departments that we have set up. In addition, we have a funding source summary page that looks at where the funding's coming from, and then finally a list of the projects by funding source. So if you wanted to look at what projects have special assessments, what projects are levy, what projects are debt, you can look at that page as well. Just to give you a quick overview on where we're at, we typically do a 5-year capital improvement plan, and so this is a new 5-year capital improvement plan for 2021 through 2025. But with the Planet software, we have the ability to stretch that out over 10 years. But we're just looking right now at the 5-year period, and I really want to try to focus on some of the projects we've identified for 2021. And if you're okay with the plan, you realize what we're looking at into the future as far as capital projects. And then we could talk about individual projects as part of this plan, but also as part of the operating plan. My goal is to have the 2021 projects also replicated in the 2021 operating budget. So that's, again, a little bit different. It's not like it's a separate pot of money, a CIP money versus an operating budget money. We're really looking at this all together. So if you would go back and look at last year's, the 2020 CIP, and look at the projects we had planned for 2021, and I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. In the 2020 CIP, we listed a potential listing of projects about $49 million for 2021. Tonight you'll see we have projects listing $64 million, and I can talk about those differences when we get to it, but I'm just kind of giving you an overview right now. And we can talk about some of the major additions to that as we move forward. So really with that, I'd really want to get into kind of the department summary. We've identified different departments kind of matching up with our operational departments. So this again is a illustration and a plan that's kind of driven by the departments. They're all listed here, and I don't need to go through those, and I think we're pretty much familiar with the various departments that we have within our structure. Then we look at funding sources, and again, there's a summary page of all the funding sources, and those are listed on this page as well. From special assessments to GO debt, the tax levy, the tax increment financing, some transit funds, and all these other sources as well. So the big question in front of council is, do we pay cash as we go along, or do we issue credit? And we have some cash. We have projects that are identified to be paid for by cash, but we have projects that have been identified to be financed through general obligation debt. So some projects might incorporate both, but for the most part, we try to look at how we're going to fund our various projects as we move forward. General obligation bonds in themselves last 20 years. We try to do facilities, streets over a 20-year period. Equipment and some of those other things we do by notes because those are shorter term. We're also looking at utilizing the state trust fund. We do that for a number of reasons. Number one, if a project is taxable, we'll use a state trust fund. And we also are looking at some equipment this year to be financed by the state trust fund because we can shorten up even less than the 10 years to try to match the life of the asset with the life of the financing, because you don't want to be paying for an asset that's totally consumed longer than what you're using that asset for. Our utility debt, we've basically utilized revenue bonds for water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater utilities, so we look at that as well. General obligation just means it's backed by the full faith and credit of the city. When you make and approve general obligation debt, you're actually approving an irrepealable tax levy. So when we issue debt in 2020, we're saying we're going to levy funds in 21 through whatever it would be, 2040 or 2030 to pay off that debt. So there is an obligation of the community down the line. And those tax dollars are then pledged to ensure the payment. And because it's backed by tax ability of the city, we usually have a little bit better financing or interest rate on general obligation debt versus revenue debt. So those are some of the things we look at in issuing debt. Then other types of debt, we also use it for special assessments, for tax increment projects, and a couple of the other projects as well. Just to briefly touch on some of the strategies in the past, we've used debt to kind of aggressively address our street and stormwater program. We looked at shifting some of that to revenue bonds for water, sewer, and special assessments. We try to look at matching funding with grant revenue, and then we try to limit the use of debt to 10-year notes for some of the capital equipment. So that's been going on since 2018. So going into this project, this chart is similar to the one I showed you last year. And I could actually call this up on the screen and we can go through different scenarios if you'd like. But right now this is showing that for 21 through 2030, we have the ability to issue $15 million annually in new debt. We're figuring out how much debt is coming off of our books each year and how much is getting added, so there's a net change to the debt. We track that change. And the item in blue is the equalized value, and that's an estimate at this time, $4,434,000,000 Right now, we know what the local assessor has placed on valuation for our community, but the state is still in the process of compiling the manufacturing assessment amounts. So that's an estimate at this time, so that's why it's kind of noted in blue. And then we don't know what the future is going to be as far as the valuation for the city. But in this scenario, we're estimating that growth to be about 1%. Now, the city has had lower than 1% growth, and has had in the last couple of years higher than 1% growth. But one of the factors long-range finance was looking at is measuring how much of our debt limit or debt capacity is being used, and we're trying to get to the goal of being 50% of the state limit. So that last column represents what our percentage of total debt limit is being used. So for 2021, we had about 54%, just over 54% of our legal debt limit. Again, with the goal of trying getting it to 50%, and you can see we get to that number under these scenarios by the year 2028, we'll be under 50%. And by 2030, we would be at 48.4%. So I just want to take a quick pause there to see if there's any comments about some of these scenarios. And again, I can pull up that spreadsheet and put it on the screen if we want to talk about that.
Russ, are you concerned? I know that the 1% estimate growth in equalized value, we discussed that at long range finance, and that was before COVID and the economic issues. Is there a concern that our equalized value is going to go down? At which point that would write up our percentage of debt limit used?
Yeah, that's I've tried to be as conservative as possible. We can certainly change that to zero or negative growth. I just kind of looked at what was happening in the past. I don't think it's over optimistic. I'm not concerned about it. Really, the big issue will be when you come to issue debt, whether it's in 2021 or 2025. What is the comfort level of the city council at that particular point in time? This exercise is really to show you that if we look at a practice of issuing $15 million of debt and continue to do that, you can see that even with the new debt coming on board at $15 million for 2021, we actually have a reduction of $1.8 million in general debt outstanding because we're retiring more debt than what we're taking on. So that's a good thing. All those negative numbers in the middle is a good thing. And in 2029, we have a slight increase of $300,000, but we can work at minimizing that when we issue new debt and just kind of restructure our debt accordingly. Because I think you'd want to kind of not have that big bump in an outstanding debt in 2029, but we're a long ways from that right now.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that jumps out to me on this one, and we were part of this, the creation of this, but I get it that there's a lot of variables and that we can put any number in there we want to show any number we want. But what concerns me most is, while our goal is to get to 50%, our goal also is to reduce our debt, just the straight number of debt. And by doing it, by showing it at least this way, that if we're taking on 15 million new debt, going forward for the next decade, we only drop 3 million, 4 million off of our actual debt load.
Yeah, we hit
So
some.
while we're getting, if we're playing the numbers right with the equalized value, getting down to 50%, but yet we're not paying off that much, it makes us feel good, but it isn't that productive either, though. So balancing the needs of the immediate versus the wants of the future as well.
I think that's the point I was trying to make with this. Is it's a lot of money to take on, and we've realized some really good reduction in debt the last couple of years, but after 2021, that's down to a minimal amount. But at the same time, we're looking at a 5-year plan that has a lot of needs. And if you talk to Public Works and streets, for example, we probably could invest more in our streets to keep things current. So that's that balancing act we have to weigh in. And I think as we looked at projects for 2021 and 2022, we think, consider issuance of $15 million of debt makes reasonable sense in light of the projects that we're facing and in light of our ability to repay and maintain a fair amount and not increasing a future burden as far as a tax rate.
It's worth pointing out, too, that lowering the percentage of debt limit used also will lead to a increase, or should lead to an increase in our bond rating. So, there is a tangible fiscal benefit from doing that as well, just as there is from lowering the total amount of debt.
One of the things that Russ and I had talked about as we were preparing this was the council policy up to this point has been to limit our borrowing to about $12.5 million annually. And as we analyzed the last several years, the general categories that Russ has identified have been fairly consistent in terms of what do we fund for equipment, for streets, for parks. There hasn't been an appreciable increase or decrease in any of those areas. Now, through council's policy of looking at our facilities, that's really what's driving this, because we're not proposing to add extra streets or parks or any of that. What we are proposing is roughly $3 million a year to borrow for those facilities that council has identified. And that is essentially the reason why there's a reduction in the change from the previous year. Instead of borrowing $3 to $4 million less, we're going to borrow $1 to $2 million less, and that borrowing is proposed to go towards facilities. A very phased-in approach. If you take a look at the 5-year plan, you'll see on facilities, for example, I've said and all the departments know this, and I believe council is, my first recommendation is for the parks building. Once that's done, then it's the fire training building. Once that's done, we have to take a look at the museum. And inside of that, we also have a big project down the road, potential for East 9th Street. And anytime something happens with the Pioneer, that could trigger something. So those large projects cannot get done within the confines of our $12.5 million borrowing. So what we're trying to do is give you a vehicle to get those other projects done, and demonstrating that over the course of the decade, we can still get to 50% even with that. But Mr. Mugarauer, you're right. You take a look at where we were in 2014, our net balance, I don't know, Russ, if you can point out, it's the third rate, right, that column over there. We were at $147 million in debt, and now we're down to $121 million. $26 million increase, a lot to be proud of. A lot of that's some utility debt that's gone off, because we had some utility debt within that $147 million. Much less is part of that now. We're doing borrowing over 10 years as opposed to 20 years. That's no different than getting a shorter term mortgage. It's a good thing in the long run. It's a bit of a hit in the short run.
Well, the other thing I also wanted to call out, and I didn't the first go around, is if you look at 2019 and 2020, while we talked about $12.5 million in debt, we did more in 19 and 20 because we did some refinancing. We did refinancing because we were able to take advantage of lower interest rates. So we took on new debt at lower rates than what was on the books. And for example, in 2020, our refinancing actually saved us over or close to $800 and some thousand in real value current value, present value dollars of future principal and interest payments. So that was a good thing. But our debt is in relatively good shape as far as how much we're paying in interest. So I don't know if there's going to be a lot of room for future refinancing of debt. So this does not anticipate any refinancing, but we're at pretty historically low rates right now.
So if opportunities present themselves, we would, but we're
Yeah.
not making that assumption because we can't guarantee that. But the 1% assumption that Councilmember Ford brought up, I mean, that's an assumption that the first few years of this chart, we were not hitting. It was flat. The last few years, we've seen a bump. There's very likely going to be a change, and it could very likely go down. But we put a projection in there until we hit actual of 1% over the course of the decade. If we get 1% average growth annually, yeah, we may not get it in 22, but we might get a little bump in 23 as things pick up again. But over the course of the decade, can we expect that type of increase? And that's what we're banking on, so to speak.
Again, if you wanted to look at different scenarios, I can certainly do that and call that up if you'd like to have some interest in that, in looking at that.
I think the council, for lack of a better term, enjoyed going through that exercise. Mayor?
Nobody's asking.
All right.
Okay.
Well, let me just give you a couple of other snapshot pictures of what this really means. If you look at going back to 2014, again, we're upper 70% of debt limit. So we were bumping up to the max. Our goal through long-range finance and the city council is to get that down to 50%. So you can see that in 27, 28, 29, and 30, we get to that point. The other picture that I wanted to show you is the red line is the actual estimated debt limit that we'd be looking at in the future. And again, this is a good thing. As we reduce our debt, that gap becomes bigger, and this is just another visualization of that gap spreading as we go into the future. So that gives us the ability to take on more debt if we needed to or if we had to for any type of economic development project or other priorities of the council. Again, this is all assuming a $15 million issuance each year going forward. So this just kind of gives you a quick snapshot of what that might look like. So again, in the past, we were looking at kind of borrowing $12.5 million. Now we're looking at $15 million for 2021 and 22. I left $15 million in future years all the way through 2030. We talked about the 1% equalized growth. And then there's also funding set up to be paying for capital projects with levy. And the more we can do with levy and the less on debt, that's good because the current taxpayers are paying for it. But at the same time, a lot of the assets we put into place today really benefit future property owners and residents of the city of Oshkosh. So there's some thought process that it's better, especially when the economy the way it is today and interest rates are so low, you know, in the 2% range, that carrying cost is relatively minor, and we can assign the cost out to those people that are paying taxes into the future that are using those assets. So that's another way to look at issuance of the debt. So that gets us back to some of the major projects for 2021. In our 2020 CIP, we had discussed a new parks facility building, but it was not listed as a funded project. So when you look at that $49 million that was in the 2020 CIP, The project was identified, but it was listed as unfunded. If you're also trying to reconcile the 2020 CIP to this one, the clear water well project in the water utility was basically pushed back from 2020 to 2021, so that's in the 21 CIP and in the water number as well. There's some transit facility improvements and buses that we're getting funding through the CARES Act. We're proposing to be funded through the CARES Act. That wasn't included in our 2020 CIP, so those are the major differences between what we had identified as potential projects and what we have before you this evening. We have basically 4 major streets coming forward. West 9th, CP, Amro, and then the Oregon Street Interceptor. They all are carrying large tags, price tags. I talked about, we also have identified other community development projects in this listing, and that carries a big price tag. I talked a little bit about transit, and we have some money devoted to general building and equipment, and then the utilities. So at this point, if you wanted to, we could go and see once if you have any questions about projects in the different departmental categories. Department heads are here to help answer any questions on any of their requests. So I don't know, you know, again, my main focus tonight was try to keep this at a higher level, but you know, there are some big projects with big price tags that we think should be done in 2021. And then you can also see some of those similar projects, what the needs are going to be in 22 to 25. And it doesn't get any easier, or, you know, if you decide not to do a project in 2021, we have competing interests in 2022 and beyond. I'm not sure at this point if you wanted to get into specific presentations or comments or questions.
Can I ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
Under the, so is the CARES Act money located under the grant funding source?
Yes.
I presume. How much of that 5.8 million is from the CARES Act?
Okay, now you're gonna put me to the test.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, those are good questions. Pretty much all of it. So the easiest way for you to find that information is going to the projects by funding source. So it's it's on page
5.
Yep.
5, and you'll see all of the projects that are listed by grants. And we use, it takes a little bit of deciphering, but it's in there under transit, TR. So we got 2 hybrids and 2 clean diesel buses at 2.3, and then some work on the transit center for 2.3. And those are all going to be covered by the CARES Act.
I think is a little bit of the bus coming from some transit funds, not CARES, because that fare box, isn't that fare box coming out of the, is that fare box also coming out of the,
Yeah. Steve, can you help us out on that?
That's CARES fund.
Okay.
yeah, so some of those, but the bulk of it are those 4 items that you see there. It's not, that's more than the 4.5, and that's because there's some transit money in there as well, not just CARES Act.
But really,
that-
so a good chunk of the increase from last year's CIP to this year's is that CARES Act fund.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
Thank you.
you'll find that with utilities too, and James can talk about that. We wanted to consolidate some prior year stuff all into one, so even though it's non-lapsing, I think Russ and James went through that and said, we need the council to see the entirety of the Clearwell project. And for those who've been on the council a number of years, Deb, you may remember this, Mayor, Matt, I mean, that Clearwell project's been in the CIP for a number of years, and we're still crossing our fingers that we're gonna get the green light for it, but that's a huge part of this. How big is that project in totality, Russ?
10 million?
Yeah, and we've been waiting on that project for a number of years.
Russ, the totality of that project's over 20.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I know you said you want to keep it high level, and I have no issue with that. However, looking at the calendar, when's the next opportunity that we're going to have to actually dive into it if we don't go tonight in
Well-
terms of talking about projects?
Yeah, if you think you need more time, and I don't want to rush you through it, we can certainly set up another work session. Getting to the end product, we're looking at this as a city manager discussed, going to the plan commission in August and having the plan itself presented at a city council meeting at the end of August, the 25th. And that would adopt the plan in its entirety, and then each of the projects would still be part of that operating budget approval in November.
So when the departments come and meet with the council in October,
So we-
it's budget time then, and it's appropriate to bring it up then.
But we'll have already approved the CIP,
The-
and we'll
The
be.
plan,
The
yes.
plan itself, so you're going to say, well, you already approved the plan, why are we discussing an individual project now? It's going to be, the process is a little,
I would say the plan is part of, you hear me talk every once in a while about authorization versus appropriation. This authorizes those expenditures, but it does not appropriate it. So
Correct.
council still has final authority over appropriating those funds. The idea here is it gets us an idea of what we should be budgeting for. It's a little different approach than what we've done in the past, but the idea is to get us in the planning mode earlier, and I think that was part of how this process was working. This is similar to a lot of communities have their CIP approved before mid-year, just so that they can get the CIP to match up to the budget, and then the council has another opportunity to look at the budget and say, well, we do or don't want to do that. The debt management is a big part of that. If the council, for example, doesn't like the idea of 15 million, it's better to know now, because then we can scale that back. So that is a high-level discussion, even though it gets into, you're going to be getting into the discussion of facility projects. It's unavoidable, but at least you can have a look at it and give us some feedback on that approach.
personally, I don't mind, staff is here tonight for a reason. I don't have a problem taking some time to talk about some projects. I don't think we need to necessarily go each individual one and ask where 10,000 is going here and 20,000 is here, but if, if we want to set aside some time yet tonight to talk about some specific, not all, and council sticks to that, some specific, not all.
Well, on the
I think
agenda-
that'd be, that's reasonable, that we're not going to belabor it, but that we do talk about some specific projects.
Well, and we have it on the agenda
Right.
for reviewing the projects by department, so absolutely.
Well, we did this in a half hour, and the idea was that we would still give you ample time to ask questions. But obviously, we've probably spent a lot more time during the budget workshops, and that's not to take that away. You can get into to additional detail with the departments in October when we talk about the budget, but they're here, they are absolutely here for a reason, and we're happy to answer questions. I think we can give overviews of some of the departments. I think that's why Russ puts this together by two ways, by department as well as by funding source. For this section, I would suggest you work off of the projects by department, because each department can kind of speak to it. If you get additional questions, we can get into the funding source, because, for example, a lot of community development is not funded with general fund. A lot of it's grants, and in other cases, a lot of it's funded by general fund. And we can talk about that. But there's, streets and utilities, those are our big projects. About a third of the 12.5 million, would you put it at about 4.8 million?
Yeah.
About 4.8 million of that amount that you see there is borrowing for those 4 major projects for next year. So you can kind of see where even though the project total there is, $16.5 million, only less than 5 million of it is general fund borrowing. So it gives you a rough idea of, there's other funding sources, and in those cases it's utilities.
Yeah, we kind of shuffled the review by department around a little bit at our staff meeting this morning, Mr. City Manager. So I don't know if we want to I don't know if we want to go to the agenda and maybe give the departments an opportunity to make a brief statement in general on their projects, and then, see once if there's any questions by each of the departments.
Yeah, since
I like
I
that.
suggested that.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody who came early will be mad at me if I start talking about streets. I told James he had to stay till last anyway. 'Cause
Sounds about right.
he gets the biggest chunk of it. So we did, parks building is a huge part of that because the assumption, so maybe if Ray can come on up and if any of his staff want to come up, but obviously parks is a big issue, not because of parks projects per se, because as I said, it's pretty static in the, about the
Park
$500,000
improvements.
range in
Yep.
terms of general fund support. But parks projects are on page 4 of the projects by department page.
Thank you, Matt.
What I'm passing around is the prioritized list that the Advisory Parks Board did back in May. This is an annual process that the Parks Board goes through, so I wanted to make sure and share that with you. I've shared it with City Manager and the Finance Director as well, and I know the council has spoke highly of this in the past to see what projects the Parks Board wanted to bring forward as well. So I can start with those and answer any questions. But as Mark said, the largest project for us and Parks Board, as you can see on their list, is our building. You'll see a discrepancy in the number. When we took this to the Parks Board, it was $3 million. At that time, there was the possible assumption that some of the fund balance from 2019 would be used for the design fees as well as the acquisition costs. Since then, with COVID, what we've done is essentially shifted that $400,000 for those costs into the first phase for possibly 21. So that's the difference in those numbers. The next project, South Park Tennis Courts, and that one is a project that's been on our horizon for a couple of years. The South Park Tennis Courts are heavily used by the community, as well as the school district, the recreation department. And the intent would be there is to add additional pickleball courts, similar to what we did down at Menominee Park. We are still getting a lot of requests from the pickleball population and players to see more courts, and we've seen that it's worked very well at Menominee Park, so that would be part of this project as well. I want to make sure I keep us in order on the sheet here.
I guess the big one, the parks, the building.
Yes.
Can you give us a little bit of an idea of why that's necessary, how that will save us long-term, presumably?
Yeah, I started with the city in 2010, and at that point, during the transition, the administration and the director were moved down to the parks building at that point. So when I was hired on and given the tour, and Mr. Roloff and Mr. Fitzpatrick, and this is a temporary, building. It's on our list to get to this, and it's going to be improved. And that was 10 years ago. So and that's not a rub on anybody. It's a matter of we have deferred facilities, and again, the funding wasn't there. But I think over the last 5 years, with the building assessments that we've undertaken with the city, the project's really bubbled to the top. If you haven't toured our facility, I'd encourage you to come down and tour it. It was never built for municipal operations, so efficiency for getting equipment in and out, for getting staff in and out. We have equipment scattered around the city. We have some equipment out at the cemetery. We have equipment at the senior center. We have equipment at Menominee Park. We have staff in all those different areas. So for us to get staff and equipment centralized is huge for efficiency. And when we look at the field operations facility, when their new facility was brought online, we know there's an efficiency on getting staff in and out, and Mark can attest to more because I think Kevin Ewan shared a number, but whether that's 15, 20, or 30 minutes a day, getting staff in and out to the projects is efficient, and it helps on all ends. And we take a look at safety, obviously. The building, we had some safety issues about a year and a half, I think, ago, and some of those were temporarily taken care of.
Yeah, if you got
But again, I think it's the building that the past couple of councils have agreed it's it's met its match or its time, so.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other ones on the parks building? And
I guess
again,
what I would point out is that I try to take the recommendations from the advisory park board as best I can. Sometimes there are certain things like Riverside Cemetery, roads repaving. We pretty much do that, every other year, Bill? Yes. Yeah, so we try to, this is the on year for that, so even though it's ranked 9th, I think that's also the Parks Board's way of saying, we know you're gonna do that one anyway, Mark, so we'll put that wherever we want. But the reality is that is pretty much a regular part of our program. So that's funded, but for the most part, we did, as in similar years, it's projects 1 through 4, and then maybe a couple others after that. The light bollards at Riverside Park, that's been an issue, we know that. So even though that's ranked 7th, you take a look at something like Row Park, it's another 200,000. I try to limit the park play equipment to 1 per year. So that's why West Haven is in and Row Park is out. That's kind of the general thing that we do to try to do that. But then Russ and I sat down and we took a look at, from a borrowing standpoint, about $500,000 of borrowing every year, give or take. That's about what Parks gets, because that's about all we can muster up, even with the Parks Board recommending these things. Obviously, half their projects are on the cutting room floor. That's pretty comparable. I think we've done that pretty much every year, right, Ray?
yeah, and I would say our requests that come in, if you take a look at over 5 years, are pretty much in that 3 to 4 million range, because we do have some larger projects for the next 2, possibly our building. Then we have Rainbow Memorial Park and Menominee Park Ball Field Complex, some of those projects that are higher cost. But when you take those out, it's about $1 million basically, except for those large projects. So I'm working off of the page that you guys got in your document, page 4. If there's any other questions, I think Mark touched a little bit on the cemetery road repaving. The next one down is Menominee Park trail improvements. This is one that you may have heard about through Bike and Ped Committee and others out at Menominee Park, more on the north end. It's not the trail that's in that bad a condition, it's the drainage issue. And what's happened is there's areas, and you can see them now when you go out there after the rain is gone, there's dead grass because the rain collects there and it ponds. What it does, it'll get to the trail, and that's a low spot, so it'll collect on the trail itself. So what we did was worked with engineering and stormwater staff, went out to the site, and we all agreed saying, it's not a trail issue. We need to deal with the drainage issue before it gets to the trails. So what we're looking at doing is putting in some piping, some drainage to divert it around the trail or under the trail, whatever we need to do. So that's what that $75,000 would be used for, and we believe that's going to resolve that issue, not only during the summer months having the water pond there, but in the winter months as well, making it slippery and ice conditions. So, and I believe, Mayor, you were at the Bike and Ped Committee when there's some discussion, and they supported this request as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Going down the list, again, the Riverwalk light bollards. The first section of Riverwalk was completed in 2010, and we are seeing the light bollards vandalized, not working. There's the first model we had put out on the Riverwalk is no longer available, so we're trying to get something that's a little comparable. But essentially, we've got lights that are out that we can no longer switch in and out. In the past, we've had a few from inventory. When we had the other sections of Riverwalk being developed, we might be able to use some of those lights until that section of Riverwalk got developed, and we working with Scooter Electric, we piecemealed as much as we can. We're no longer at that point. We need to actually purchase some light bollards and get those repaired. Talked a little bit about the South Park tennis courts already. West Haven play equipment and surfacing for $200,000. That's essentially what we've been doing at all the neighborhood parks. Putting in the perimeter walk, making an accessible route, the rubber surfacing. And just for your information, that equipment was installed in 2001. So it'll be 20 years old going into next year. And I think that's it for 2021 as far as park projects go.
I think my only concern is really gonna be the cost of the new building. As with anything, especially spread over a couple of years, and, you know, we started talking about this many years ago, even before I was even on council, you guys were talking about it, but, you know, that roughly $6.5 million price tag last year, what's it mean this year, and what's it actually gonna be next year when things start? So keeping within that framework and not letting it balloon is gonna be important, especially with it taking so much of the parks budget as well as just, you know, financed dollars. That's my only real concern, is just keeping that one on budget and reducing overruns or missed things if at all possible. It's not that it's missed intentionally, but just as the project, you know, unfolds. So that's my only concern with the total value of that project.
Sure.
And that's what happened with the Public Works Garage. It was the inflation because of the delay. When the city had borrowed for it the year before I arrived, and we didn't open it until 6 years after I started. So it was a 7-year lag. The inflation factor alone is really what hurt us. And the danger of delaying is that number becomes less and less reliable.
And I can let you know, we have been working with Cooney Architects, who did the field operations facility, because back in 2012, they actually did just a very conceptual design for us, saying, this is what we would recommend for you. So what we've been doing is refining that and sharing this information with them and doing some refining of that design. They're still comfortable with this number. It's not as large as we would like, but we understand that. We understand we need to get something more efficient and better for the public down there. And we looked at it too from the neighborhood side. When you take a look at Verve, the university, Auto Authority, all those buildings really stepping up and making the neighborhood a lot pleasing to the eye. And then you see our building, we feel, you know, we need to do our part as well. So back to your, Cooney is very comfortable that they can get a facility built within that budget.
Thank you.
Question for you, Russ, on this and others. So in the formatting here are the priorities, and so as we're looking at that, you know, 2s, 3s, 4s, and we have no 1s in here, right? In the Parks Department?
Yeah, this is, again, and just to give you a little bit of background information, there are individual detail sheets that were submitted by each department. You know, you can see my book. And we decided to give you a kind of a broader base summary to help us with the discussion this evening. But part of that is the departments assigning that priority list on themselves. And then as we go through that process, the city manager and myself actually score roads. We don't score equipment, and we look at a CIP score, but this priority is a tool that's inside of this access database that we're using that's self-defined by the end user. And we kind of use that in helping to identify priorities. But as we mentioned in the parks and other departments, they go back to their advisory committees and look at recommendations. And I think the city manager and myself will look at that and then look at totality of the project. So,
But would that then go away from the original long-range finance prioritization recommendations?
I think it complements it. I don't know if it's intended to go away with. I think it's just another tool to help us use to evaluate the necessity of moving a certain project forward or waiting a year or two to do it.
This is the first year we used that number designation, and quite honestly, I didn't look at it a lot. I still use the scoring that the Long Range Finance Committee gave. But even within those categories, by their very nature, projects such as infrastructure, health and safety ones, things on the water and sewer side tend to rate the highest because of the environmental issues associated with those. Public buildings don't rate as high because they don't have the public buildings are not intended to serve the public directly. They serve the public indirectly, so they naturally get lower scores. So this priority list, you're challenging me to take a better look at it next year. I didn't give it a much look, to be honest with you, Madam Mayor.
I think the only thing, I like the improvements of the process. I'm always happy to see the process improve. We're used to seeing that data about the projects, the specific stuff that you haven't supplied. So while the changes, parts of the process are good, it's also, change is difficult at times.
Yes.
And acknowledging that, we're used to seeing that data. In fact, even when it comes to public works, I think we've talked about this before, knowing how old the infrastructure really is. I don't get to see that.
Well,
And
that's
if, in a month, 6 weeks, council's going to approve a CIP, and yet we haven't seen some of that data that we're accustomed to possibly seeing. So I think that's where there might be some questions just regarding some of the specifics, because we don't know it.
Would council like to see like all 5 years worth of the sheets, or just like the 21 projects? I'm just asking so I can get you the information you think you need to help make your decision.
Generally, myself, I look at the current year, 21, because anything out, and while we're always planning for the next year, that 2-year cycle, things
Yeah.
change so much that's myself.
I can commit to getting you a PDF copy of the 21 sheets, within the next week.
That'd be appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
guess, I would just say that the context of the priority in this thing that we're looking at, maybe, some cliff notes here, and maybe even on the sort, when we're looking at it, a sort on the priority, as opposed to maybe it looks like it's sorted by project number.
Yeah. We'll see once if we can modify that and make that work a little bit better.
But then understanding the context of this priority scoring in the context of the long-range finance hierarchy of that priority would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's good feedback. Again, this is a new process, and any feedback to help you make a decision is good for us. So I welcome that.
And this gives you a rough idea. It's the same, I have the project list. It gives you a rough idea of what they look like. We just got to clean them up a little more for your purposes of consumption. But that compares similarly to what we had in the past. It's just how it's presented is a little different. So we can certainly provide that to council.
I know that Russ and I had talked before the meeting, because we do have parks equipment, some of the maintenance equipment, and we have field staff here. If there's any questions, there's really only 2 pieces if you take a look at page 5 for 2021. There's a replacement of a 2001 Ford step van, and then a replacement of a 1989 topsoil screener. So if there's any questions, Bill or Chad could address those, but both very old pieces of equipment and very much need a replacement. So.
One of the things I think it's important to point out, and this applies to every single department, so it just because Ray's first, you take a look at the amount of funding for parks equipment in 2021 on page 5, it's $88,000. You see that number rise significantly. We can only afford so much in a given year, so a lot of this stuff gets pushed back. And it's not because it's not needed, it's because the 2 pieces of equipment, one will be 20 years old, one will be 31 years old, 32 years old. So is it just based on age? No, it's not based on totally age. But you can see the ones that we pushed to 2022 already are already some fairly old vehicles. And you'll see that on down the line, but our number increases a great deal. We're still gonna have to balance the 2022 CIP for you between now and this time next year. And look what we've got, look what we're facing. Ray's only getting 2 pieces of equipment, but his needs are significantly greater than that. And that's the thing we go through, and we talk to Travis about the maintenance history with these. We want to make sure that what we're presenting to you are the worst of the worst, but recognize there's a long queue of equipment. And I'm just talking to you about parks. Public Works is massively larger than anything Ray has.
Nothing else?
Nope.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Yep.
So if we're going down the list, the next one would be community development.
when Mr. Davis comes up here, a lot of these are projects that are based on grants, and I think Mr. Davis can talk about that. And there's other projects in keeping with plans that are put together. So Alan, if you could, Alan doesn't have a committee like the Parks Board, so he doesn't necessarily have a ranking by an independent board or anything like that, but we talk about these a great deal on a regular basis.
And our job is to implement plans that have been adopted, so a lot of these are related to plans that we've already approved. I think when one of the memos or the slides, it talked about continuing with the Riverwalk, and next year we have the Rainbow Memorial Park Riverwalk, which we did get about $250,000 of grant funds for. And the next project in 21 would be the Riverwalk on Pioneer Drive from Main Street over to the railroad tracks. That one we applied for a grant here in May, and we hope to hear by the end of the year and could start construction in 21. We're optimistic about that one as well. We've closed out the one that was in Morgan District, and we're almost done with the Riverwalk there beside Lakeshore. I think we have some bollards that are on order that are still need to be delivered. That's about the last piece. So those are the Riverwalk projects in the short term. Long term, we're still contractually obligated to put a Riverwalk around Pioneer Island and the marina, and that is a big number. That is about halfway down, and right now we're projecting that to start in 22 and last 3 years. That's an $8 million Riverwalk project that loops all the way around the island, incorporates 2 bridges, and then goes along the marina down to the South Breakwater and out to the tip of the South Breakwater. So it'll be a great project, but there's a lot of things that need to go into that, and a worst case scenario for us is that the development happens quicker on Pioneer Island and Pioneer Marina, and we have to get it done even quicker. We've kind of staggered this out over 3 years to maximize our grant funds to help pay for that. And there's still some discussion as to what we can do to minimize those costs, and we've been talking to the property owner about that. Nothing's been finalized on that at this point in time, but we're always looking for ways to minimize that cost as well. The other big project related to Pioneer Island is 9th Avenue Extension. That's the last project that we haven't completed from the Central City Plan from 2000. 9th Avenue is supposed to go from Main Street east over to the railroad tracks and kind of cross the tracks at its current location at Pioneer Drive. That project right now is about $6.5 million, again spread between 22 and 23. Those 2 projects, the Riverwalk and the 9th Avenue Extension, that's half the budget that Community Development's advertised at this point, put on the CIP at this point in time. And I'm actually glad we have them in the CIP, because if you recall the last 2 projects that we did with the Arena and Oshkosh Corp., they weren't even in a CIP budget. So at least we're planning for them at this point in time, because we think the Pioneer redevelopment will take place in the very near future. Let's see, I can talk about a lot of blight elimination, South Shore specifically. We've had a redevelopment plan since about the early 2000s to acquire and demolish blighted properties in the South Shore. We recently adopted the Sawdust District Plan, and that also identifies some blight to remove. And then we also have neighborhoods that are asking us to remove blighted properties within their neighborhoods. I would say every neighborhood plan we've adopted has identified blighted properties, and the city and the RDA have to work together to acquire those. The city can't acquire the blighted properties since the RDA is there to do that. So the city basically appropriates the funds for the RDA to select those sites, and then it comes back to the city council to actually spend the money, getting back to Mr. Mugarauer's original point. So that process has been established, and we've been very aggressive in trying to obtain those scattered site blight elimination projects. We've done many more of those in the last few years than we did in the previous decade, and the direction at this point is still to continue with those acquisition demolition type projects. Let's see, there's a couple other projects to highlight. The Great Neighborhoods Initiative, we still have that planned for the next 5 years. There's a bit of a lag this year in that we haven't been able to get the applications out because the neighborhood associations really haven't been able to get together to come up with projects, so we're pushing that back application hopefully to late summer, early fall. And that 250 would be allocated by the council, and that's why the 175 and 175 is because those projects probably aren't going to be done until 21 at this point. Let's see. Gateway improvements is another one I'd highlight. When we adopted the Central City Plan, we had two corridor plans also identified, the South Park Corridor and the 9th Avenue Corridor. And we've identified a few projects for intersection improvements, wayfinding signage, some pedestrian improvements, as well as potential for blight elimination along those corridors. And let's see, industrial park signs are also on the list. We've gone through the RFP process to gather proposals from sign companies, and we should be awarding the first signs later this summer. At least recommending something to council to award that.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
I remember when this was brought up, when I think it was 2 years ago. I think it was former Mayor Cummings. This was one of the things he liked and wanted this. This was something he was a proponent of. I'm still trying to figure out what the benefit is. Obviously, I know more advertising, usually means better responses. However, this is very unique. Industrial park signs, what's our actual benefit that we expect to receive? Because right now, Go EDC, Chamber, your own internal department does a lot of the, legwork and field work for any responses we get. Do we actually think a $40,000 investment in some signs is gonna return something for us? Or is this, is it spending something to make it look pretty?
We do have signs at the Universal Business Park, and I would say that helped advertise the Universal Business Park. That's why I think the idea was germinated to say, well, if we do it at the Universal Business Park, why do they get a sign and nobody else gets a sign type of thing? I can tell you long term it becomes a maintenance liability as well. That's part of the money here would actually repair the Universal Business Park sign that's already out there. So your point's well taken. We do a lot of marketing digitally and through the conferences and the other marketing efforts we do with business retention and expansion. So the signage is probably a small factor in the overall package of advertising, but it was very much stressed that we needed to do better signage. And that does include some signage for just the basic for sale signs that we're always buying.
Councilmember Mugar, I would say that your recollection was accurate. It was council direction for us to do that, so in order to be consistent, we left it in the budget. I did reduce it because we're trying to balance things out, but we felt we needed to have it in there because that was council's previous direction, but certainly council can make appropriate changes.
Yeah, and I think it came up because a number of sites there was like no visual cue to anyone if they passed a site, if it was available for development, as I recall the discussion.
Correct. And I would probably say the one that might have the greatest value right now is the transload in the Southwest Industrial Park, because I think that's something we can tout and actually help market the transload site as well as direct all the traffic to the correct location rather than the wrong road.
So, Mr. Davis, and Mr. Van Gompel, maybe you can give some further clarification. So it looks like under community development, so we have the 9th Avenue East extension to Main Street. But doesn't that really belong under the Pioneer Island or belong with that, I guess, in the same project, or in streets, or some of the things, seem to be, even gateway improvements, very street oriented or parks oriented. So help us understand why some of those would be separated out under your department as opposed to under either parks or streets or with a specific project if it's needed for that project?
Typically, the projects that community development gets involved with for planning projects, the natural progression is the implementation. So that's how community development gets involved with industrial parks or redevelopment sites. And 9th Avenue is really for the redevelopment site. That is the South Shore and part of the northern part of the Sawdust District and part of the Central City Plan from early 2000s. So that was almost thought of as an important piece just for the redevelopment of the South Main Street area. It germinated, of course, back when Pioneer Island was going to be redeveloped, and we needed to have a straight shot from the interstate to Pioneer Island. So it kind of helped redevelop that site as well. So I'm thinking it's doing double duty. And the reason we get involved with Riverwalks is they're typically involved with redevelopment sites that we're trying to market. So, and we've been very successful with grants. So we've probably gotten grants 8 out of the 9 years I've been with the city applying for grant applications for Riverwalks. So sometimes you stick with the team that keeps winning as well.
Yeah, something like
I'm not
9th
sure there's any
Avenue.
science behind it other than if you're trying to implement a plan that helps with redevelopment, economic growth, either in redevelopment sites or industrial parks, that typically ends up in community development.
I think if you think back to the Oshkosh Corporation project, and I think Alan pointed out correctly that, you know, some of those projects weren't even in the CIP. We're recognizing that they're in the CIP really because of initiatives that community development's doing. Once the project is a go, then it really does move to Public Works will manage this
They'll
project.
spend the money, no
It's a
problem.
construction. They know how to spend. Yeah, they're good at spending it. Alan plans it. They spend it. Is that fair, James? But that's, yeah, it's just more about, it's related to a development, so we put it that way.
The one area we probably project manage the most are the Riverwalk projects because they're kind of unique things that not too many departments have gotten involved with. I want to highlight one other project that you probably have not seen before, and it's a kind of a preview of the Jackson Street Corridor Study. The Phase 1 implementation, even though you haven't seen the plan, would be for some speed boards to be installed on Jackson Street. So the $60,000 item for next year would be the speed boards that will be coming in the recommendation for Jackson Street Corridor. And second from the bottom is the former sanitation garage. I like to joke with community development that we're also the kind of like the janitors and cleaning up the parts of the city that need to be redeveloped because they've either have lost value or they don't have enough value. So we have to site prepare those. We'll tear down the buildings as needed so they can become part of a redevelopment site and add more tax base to the city.
So when we use Public Works to do that demo work, do they charge you, your department?
It depends. They'll always charge us for tipping fees and any kind of special equipment they would need. Typically, they haven't charged us for personnel unless there's some unusual circumstances.
For our own equipment, we normally don't charge for it. It's the, when we knocked down Buckstaff building, we rented equipment, so that was charged because that was something that Public Works incurred over and above what they normally would. But they usually provide that as an in-kind contribution.
And one thing Public Works also does, not that I'm up here to sing Public Works praises, but when they have the opportunity, those scattered site demolitions, they can reduce the overall cost of demolition by doing the demolition if they have time, because then the city only really needs to pay the asbestos and the tipping fees and the lot grading and not have to pay necessarily a contractor to do that.
Landfill costs.
Yes, we
Huge
always have
part
to
of
pay
it.
landfill costs.
I do have one question on that. So this is one where, I guess, taking a step back, $15 million in new debt is not very appealing to me. And so I am looking to find ways to not have $15 million. So that, you know, I'm looking at projects to try to bring that down a bit. And this is one of those ones that jumps out at me. So somebody, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but explain why it needs to come down next year, and then explain why we're going to take debt on to get rid of it. That's $200,000 in new debt that we're going to take on just to demo that building. I'm not a fan of paying 10 or 20 years on something I'm gonna destroy. Useful life of it, it goes back to that, I think. But you can make a different argument, and I get that. But there's going to be projects like that that personally that I'm not a fan of 15 million. So finding $500,000 to $1 million, and bringing that down to 14-ish is more appealing to me. This is one of those ones that jumped out at me in terms of that process. So at some point, if somebody can clarify why it's got to come down next year and not 22 or 23.
I would answer that right now saying we've put this in the CIP for multiple years and keep pushing it back because there isn't any real urgency, because right now you disappoint a lot of departments because they'll have to find storage for things that have already been put in there, and as time goes by it's accumulated some of the city's storage. The only thing that I'd caution you on is when you want to see the South Shore redeveloped, the sanitation garage is not a great neighbor for the Boatworks property, and it's all been imagined that it would be combined together for a redevelopment of the Boatworks property. So when it comes to the Public Works Department doing the work, they can sometimes cost a lot less than bidding it out. This assumes we bid it out.
Do we have anything further that would move these Pioneer-related items up into immediacy like this?
If the developers come to us in the next week or two and say we're ready to start our project in 21 and say we want your Riverwalk built in 21 and 22 the same time we are, that would change the calculation very quickly for the Pioneer.
Mm-hmm. And I know that's been happening for some years. That's why I asked. That it's like if,
Yep.
when.
Well, even the demo, I think the same thing, the demo.
Yeah.
If somebody had moved quicker on the Boatworks property, we'd be bringing that to you a lot sooner. So what's the likelihood of us doing that? I'd say 50-50. But I've been saying 50-50 on Pioneer for 10 years. So I have to be honest with you. That was the kind of the running joke at State of the City, that I keep promising you Pioneer. And the day, Murphy's Law is the day you take it out of the budget is the day we're going to need it. I mean, that's just, but the reality is we don't necessarily know. We know Mr. Dumpke is actively talking to people, but you may recall during one of our strategic planning sessions, Alan and I independently said, give us a worst case scenario. And we're like, a worst case scenario, financially speaking, would be Pioneer Island develops and we got to come up with the money for the trail. I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but the reality is if Pioneer Island needs to get done, East 9th needs to get done, the trail needs to get done, and we're going to be scrambling to look for solutions to get it done.
And that's why I feel like that all should be together with one project, but I mean, maybe it's just an accounting thing that I don't really need to split hairs about, but it just seems it's very fragmented here, but many of these items tie into, one.
This is from a project management standpoint, so that project would be managed independent, even though they might be happening concurrent with one another, or
Different engineering teams and different bids, different construction.
But in the end, worst case scenario, best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it costs us $15.5 million. It's not $1 million Riverwalk, and it's not $6.5 million to do Main Street. It's $15.5 million that we got to come up with in the matter of 24 to 36 months, if and when Pioneer Island is done.
One of the things that I would say with 9th Avenue Extension, the number's accurate. I would say with respect to the Riverwalk on Pioneer Island, the discussions we've been having with Mr. Dumpke are trying to find ways that the state and Mr. Dumpke would work with us to find a much less expensive alternative to that one, meet the intent that the DNR would like to see us get access to the point that they own at the southeast corner of the island. That's really what they want. They want public to have access to that. This assumes that we're doing this river walk and a seawall on the perimeter of the island, which is the most expensive option. We're trying to pursue a way that we can meander within the interior of the island so that we don't have to rebuild the seawall and try to avoid those costs.
Oh, did we not get approved for that? I thought that was already accepted as a proposal.
With the stipulation, it does show that most expensive version, and we would have to negotiate an amendment to that stipulation to allow the city, Mr. Dumke, or the developer to put in an alternative riverwalk through that, around the island and the marina.
That was approved back in 2006,
Mhm.
but as Mr. Dumke was expressing interest, we've had some meetings with the DNR and the Bureau of Commissioner of Public Lands, which was also involved in it. And they're open to the idea of having a less expensive alternative, but they said they want to see what the development is so they can comment on it.
And that's what I'm asking. Are we any further along in seeing that?
I would say overall, no. But Mr. Dumke could walk in the next day and that could move it up. But right now, I would say no. But that's why we put the most expensive option out there, because until we know that we've got something, we have to play it the most conservatively. But my goal is to get it down significantly and have them do it through meandering through their own property, as long as they're comfortable with having that. But
Which would actually take it off the city's books as a capital project. That would become a TIF reimbursable activity for the developer.
yeah, ideally, yeah, good. Yeah, thank you, Alan. That's sort of our goal with it. But if you take the interpretation from the 2006 agreement, this is what we'd be on the hook for. But we think we can find a better alternative.
Good.
All right. Anybody else? Questions for Alan?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Next one would be transit. Mr. Collins isn't here this evening, but Steve has been actively involved in these projects from the start. Does everybody know Steve? I can't use a joke. He's the guy in the mask. So, but Steve is Steve coordinates the grants with transit. The big ones, Mr. Ford, you brought up the transit. The two big projects in transit, which is on page 6, are the 2 buses and the transit center, most of which is funded with the CARES Act funding. Steve, you want to talk about the 2 buses? Well, actually, it's 4 buses. It's 2 hybrid and 2 clean diesels.
Yeah, so I've really learned an appreciation for all the tough decisions that have to be made. Let me be the ice cream in the middle of dinner. This is, we were given a gift from the FTA. We got $4.5 million, of which is ours to spend. Projects we have before you, the big one is the Downtown Transit Center. Our plan has been approved by the FTA and WSDOT. The Transit Advisory Board unanimously approved our ideas here. We've got a lot of exciting opportunities, most of which pertains to COVID-19 and basic overall public safety and the safety of our employees. The big ticket item is the Downtown Transit Center. Basically, we would be on the same property, basically looking to expand that. We currently, our drivers, it was never intended to be a break room. There's 2 restrooms down there. Our drivers are on a 30-minute turn. Not a lot of time to get back to the transit center. If you do have a lunch, so go to the washroom, some eat down there, and literally it's like trying to eat and right next to the bed. You know, it's not a great situation. So we'd be looking to improve the employee break room, adding a break room basically. Also providing a transit office to better monitor what's going on down at the transit center and have a presence there. And also open up the opportunity to have an office down there for operational staff and basically clerical, so we can sell tokens down there, not on a full-time basis, but on a part-time basis to be available to the public, so people don't have to go to the transit center for that. we have we have 4 buses in total, 2 of which are already grants that are approved. The only part of what we're asking for is basically already been approved, basically the city share, the 2 clean burning diesel buses, total about $550,000 apiece. City's committed to $110,000 for each one, so $220,000. Short of that, the other 2 buses on there are going to be spent with CARES fund. It's about $1.5 million for 2 hybrid diesel buses, which should provide more better emissions and better fuel economy. The average hybrid bus gets about 6 miles, 4.5 to 6 miles per gallon, where a diesel is currently about 3.5 to 3.9. So we'd be seeing a savings in diesel costs there. Some other exciting things we have we're looking forward to is permanent driver barriers. Right now, we currently have cleverly designed kind of a makeshift shower curtain to kind of separate the drivers from the public. We're currently getting, I believe next week should be getting 2 different prototypes for different styles of buses that actually provide a physical barrier between the public and the drivers, which would also be great for COVID-19 and also additionally for physical altercations. We had a situation last year where one of our drivers was assaulted by a passenger. So we're excited about that. Also, another thing we're very excited about is the quantum wheelchair securement system for our paratransit riders, non-ambulatory. They come in the wheelchair. The way it's currently set up, you cannot maintain safe local distancing with the driver who is put in harm's way and the passenger potentially also, because the driver has to strap the chair into the bus basically to secure it from sliding around. This would be a system where the rider would actually position the wheelchair in the bus. It'd be self-secured, and the driver wouldn't have any close interaction with that. And we're looking to put that in 12 of our buses and look at purchasing those with the new buses that we're purchasing down the road.
So, would that somehow improve efficiency as well, not just for the rider, but for the 1080 delays in the route?
It would definitely, potentially, yes. Driver wouldn't, yeah, I would believe so, yes. It'd be a smoother process once everybody gets to learn the process. I think primarily be mostly a safety benefit, but it could also pertain to efficiencies, yes.
And then I just had a question on the transit center building.
Yes.
That currently does not have air conditioning, right?
I
In
believe there's a window unit in there.
there is.
Yeah.
Is that, would you say, in the absence of our ability to provide cooling centers, especially right now, is the transit
Oh, I'm sorry.
system and center used as a cooling station during those hours?
No, and I misunderstood your question. The actual warming shelter is not air conditioned, no.
Right. So would the new one be?
That would be something with the exact details to that we haven't gone through yet, but that's something we could look into.
Because we talked about making things more comfortable for the transit drivers and safety for the drivers and partitions for the drivers. But I'm other than the wheelchair securement system, I'm not seeing which of these other items help the users.
Well, if you have an office down there, we could obviously, right now, you can't guarantee safe distancing of people down there. That's the reason why we shut the transfer center warming shelter down in the first place. It's because
that's closed right now.
right now it's closed because
Oh, I
we couldn't
didn't
enforce people not being 6 foot apart and they were all over each other. These are things that are currently, we've got Central Wisconsin Planning Committee. We've got a current grant going on for some consulting going on that are looking at all the possibilities. There's nothing that's hardcore wired into that yet. So that I think it's actually down to like 1.8 million, give or take a few thousand on there. So it's basically the planning process right now, but these are all things that definitely could be considered and added in.
What we're gonna need to do is, we live with a transit center we can afford, so you had asked a question earlier about, parks. In this case, the grant is the only funding source for this, so it'll be, what will $2.3 million buy? And they were careful to put in a generous contingency in the event that these costs are there, that they've had some discussions with some people about this, and so 1.8, Steve, is it?
I believe it's, yeah, in that ballpark,
Yeah.
25 or somewhere around there.
You can see we're, in case any of these the bids on the buses go a little higher, or there's another feature that we want to add to it. We want to be prepared for all those contingencies, because we don't want to come back to council for additional funding. We want this to get funded completely with CARES Act funding.
And it's a situation where the money that's given to us is ours to spend. If we don't spend this money, then another municipality will. So this is an opportunity to have $4.5 million handed to you. It's an opportunity to take advantage of these major programs and not use really any city funds. It's 100% funded.
For two things. One, I'm more than happy to take every single dollar that the federal government wants to give us, especially for transit. So thank you to them, and thank you for trying to spend every single dollar. How, I know long-term, looking back at last year's CIP, 4 new buses wasn't on the radar this quick. A transit center wasn't on the radar this quick. With those funds, how fast did we move those replacements up, roughly?
Well, the replacements are going to need to happen regardless. We have 4 buses that are due to be replaced in 2022 based on their useful life.
2 years.
So this is basically a way, we've had 2 of them already approved through grants already. So this is an opportunity to replace those. Instead of the 80-20 split, it's 100%. So we get 2 of those buses basically for free.
Perfect. Okay.
To answer the mayor's other question, though, I think some of the improvements at the transit center would also allow for us to do the sales of bus passes and tokens at the transit center, which would be a benefit for the end user, so to speak, in that they wouldn't have to go to the transit center to do it, offices to do it. They could do it at the transfer station.
Are we talking about like a self-service kiosk? Or are we talking about a person, the old-fashioned way, you still have to hand money to, and they don't take cash, right?
Well, I don't think we've worked out all.
See all the above.
You're getting into details that we haven't gotten into yet.
I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
what the transit center means for, like,
Sure.
yeah.
I would answer see all the above because that pulls into the mobile fare. So not full-time, but we would have office hours down there where we would have a clerk available to actually sell passes, tokens, in that capacity. And then also in here, we've got mobile fares. We could look into opportunities where basically someone just basically shows a cell phone. There's a rotating clock on there. Every day has a different pattern, a different code name on there. So it's another opportunity, one, to reduce contact, COVID-19. It's also convenient. It might actually increase ridership when we're ready to go full blast.
But we still have to be prepared for people who don't have those electronic capabilities. So, we probably would, at this point, we probably would still be doing cash transactions for tokens, because that's what our customers, that's all they can do.
And we would have an office down there for that.
Yep. Other
Good.
questions?
All right.
Steve?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next category is general building and equipment, and it's a broad-based category. But before we get to the general stuff, I also did not list police and fire. So maybe if I could ask if there's any questions on police and or fire, and then we can have general administrative services come forward with the rest of the requests. So I don't know.
Maybe we can move up Brad, because Brad's not gonna,
Whatever.
yeah, Brad's not a big list either. But police and fire,
If there's questions, I didn't know if there were specific questions on either of those.
I mean, the only question I had, right, the big expense there is the new SWAT team truck. How old's the old truck?
Chief, you want to talk about your truck?
I guess how often do we use it as well?
As infrequently as possible. How's that
Yes,
for an
that's
answer?
the right answer, right?
So Councilman, your question was specifically how old is it?
Yeah.
Well, currently it's 24 years old.
Okay.
And by the time we would, if we were approved for it and purchased it, it would be approximately 25, or it would be 25, almost 26 years old.
Okay.
Quarter of a century.
Okay. So it's needed.
So I think he asked
Yeah, how often do you-
it gets
do you use
used?
it?
Well, in tongue in cheek, certainly as often as we don't want to use it, but we use it for things such as any type of tactical situations requiring special response and equipment. Any special response equipment is housed within this vehicle. Hostage barricade situations, our negotiators use it when we have folks, mental health patients who we have to go and talk them through situations that are critical. And we want to make sure we can talk them through those situations and get them safely the help that they need. Any other negotiations we might do, and also situations like we had at the West shooting, where it would respond to those types of situations where it's a long-term response where we need equipment. That's how we get our equipment from one place to another.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So it's kind of like a multi-purpose storage and
People mover.
people mover.
Yes, yes, and it also does rehab for us. As we all know, during the wintertime, it's cold. Coming from the East Coast, from the beach, it's cold. But in the wintertime, when we have officers that are responding to tactical situations and they come long-term, we have to rehab those officers. So we have to put them somewhere so they can get warmed up. And this vehicle serves that purpose as well. It allows them to go somewhere and spend some time getting a hot cup of coffee, hot chocolate, getting warm, and then we would redeploy them.
Anybody else have any questions for Chief?
I mean, the first one in that list is the one that was going to be funded with leftover funds from 2019, but that didn't happen. But it's still, this is buying time on a lot of those recommendations for a much larger police station. This is about getting by with some of these improvements.
Yeah, as I think you all are aware, the facility study indicated if we were to build a new police department, it would be a 30 million plus cost. If we were to do a major renovation to the existing safety building, it would be a $6+ million renovation. This is $150,000 to allow us to use the space that we have. The city already owns the space. We've actually already done some work within there with last year's facility money. And COVID came, and of course it changed the landscape of everything. We already have the furniture on site. We're just waiting to have the renovations done so we can actually deploy it. So
This will buy us time.
yes.
And remind me again, is that going to be like, previously we had a tenant in there, but this would be not for a tenant,
This
but
would not be
internal
for a
use?
tenant. This is for internal use. This
Okay.
essentially takes the administrative function of the police department that the
Oh,
public.
right, and shifts it over.
It puts it all in one place, so when the public, they have a more efficient one-stop shop where they can go and they can conduct their business that they have to conduct with the police department as it relates to records, as it relates to dealing with our internal affairs, dealing with our administrative function of the police department. It's all in one place, and everybody is not spread out across the building.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we also had fire department has some needs. One thing I want to point out, while Chief Stanley's coming forward, the high-vis jackets for $32,400 is actually coming out of the CIP. Actually, that'll be taken care of in 2020, also with CARES Act funding. So that's out there. We have some smaller equipment, but the bigger stuff is on the horizon with ambulance. And the training center started out in 2021, but when I had conversations with the city manager and looking at how do we stagger facilities, that we are recommending at this point that the training center be delayed until 2023, and I don't know if, Chief Stanley, if you want to talk about that or any of the other projects.
Yes, certainly. Good evening. The reference to training center, much like the Parks Director shared his anecdote, I have a similar one of when I was getting the handoff from my predecessor. He said, well, the training center is now in year 17 of the CIP. So this has been an ongoing issue, for a long time that we've lacked. Very exciting for me and the department to see it actually making it into an actual defined year, because we have not had a training center ever really in the history of the fire department. We've had many years ago, the station over on New York had a tower, drill tower that you could climb associated with it. But as far as a comprehensive classroom training center, that's something we haven't had in almost 170 years. So as our needs have changed, the training requirements have changed, growth, this is something that we really need to do to be efficient, to make sure our people are well-trained professionals, and as a potential cost savings to the city of we're not going to have to incur overtime to send them out of the city to train or to decrease our response model because they're out of the city for training. So I think that's probably the most significant. As the finance director alluded to, we have some higher priced items in the replacements of fire apparatus and ambulances. That's on our normal replacement schedule that we've had for the past number of years, to rotate those through from frontline service to reserve status to retirement. And I think that's kind of the highlights for the tip of the waves. I don't want to belabor this, and I want to have the opportunity to open it up for questions.
I guess the only question I have is, so just kind of a general question, 3.8 million for the training center. How does that end up paying for itself in either savings of using other facilities or expanding services? How does that, I guess, pay for itself in the years that we'll be borrowing on that, paying on that debt?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the industry, whether it's firefighting or hazardous material response or technical rescues, the industry has not regressed any or decreased the amount of training hours. They keep increasing. So we're struggling to maintain those training hours, because for us to use a facility that's outside the city, we're forced to have two options. Either we're going to contract overtime to go on their day off to go do that training, which we've had several discussions about the ramifications of the amount of overtime that the firefighters are working, so that makes it an increased strain on them, but also that generates a significant cost. If we were to not necessarily a direct savings like you're talking about, Mayor, but if we were to utilize on-duty crews and we send the apparatus, and the crews there to train outside the city, then that diminishes our response model. So we don't have enough coverage. Right now, as we learned from the staffing study that was done in 2019, our coverage is pretty thin. We're holding our own, but we can't really dip down in that coverage. So to allow for us to take those units and send them to an Appleton or a Fond du Lac, we probably have to add more fire engines and more fire personnel, which becomes incredibly costly. And that's as we learned from the staffing study, you're looking at $1.5 million proposition a year just for the staffing. So it wouldn't take many years to pay for that. And then you look at some of the, how does it offset revenues in funding that we receive between $200,000 and $300,000 a year from the state's 2% dues program. A lot of that is contingent on your ability to demonstrate that you have done training in these specific areas, such as pulling fire hose, ladders, rescues, things that that we would utilize the training center for. So if we cannot meet those requirements, then we would jeopardize losing that funding, which would be very drastic to the fire department and the city. Not necessarily a direct benefit to city government, but to our community. Again, all of those training requirements are tied to the Insurance Service Office or the ISO rating, that the lower your rating, the higher your premiums for commercial and residential property can be for insurance. So now that's like I said, not necessarily money in our pocket as the city government, but it's money in our citizens' pocket and our community members' pocket. So there's some direct costs like you had asked about for how would it offset and pay for itself. Then there's indirect costs. There are other things that are not as easily qualified, but you look at the risk to the firefighters. Now they're and risk to the community. If we're not meeting those training standards, what's our liability profile? That our risk goes up tremendously when the first thing that happens when heaven forbid, you have a firefighter significant injury or fatality, they say, let me see your training records. When there's a lawsuit because the apartment complex burned down and several people lost their lives, the lawyers are going to want to look at our training records. How have you trained? So it also reduces some of our threat and risk to the city as well.
With all that said, what finally triggered it for me was the opportunity to save on overtime, because when we send somebody up to Appleton or Neenah to use that training facility, we have to take off-duty firefighters, pay them overtime, because we don't want to take the firefighters out of the stations. Here, we can take them out of the stations, move them over to a central place on Sawyer, and if there's a call, they can just drop what they're doing and go on the call. So it makes them available where they otherwise wouldn't be. They can't drop everything they're doing in Neenah or Appleton. They could do it here because it's their facility. They lock the gate, they go to their call, they can come back and resume training. So it's disruptive, but that's the fire service is used to having their mojo disrupted on a regular basis. So that was really the winner for me. All the other things, I think, from an operational standpoint, the chief points out, but from a financial standpoint, the opportunity for us to save on overtime is clearly there.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening.
Are we going to general building and equipment then?
Oh,
or
if we
museum?
could, why don't we do museum? Because
Okay.
Brad only has one item in there, and then there's long-term issues with him. While he's coming up, I'm just going to take advantage of the fact that Mr. Gilshandui isn't here. He only has one item on, and for the library. So while Brad's getting seated, come on up, Brad. Don't worry. The $40,600 for them is the electrical generator. A lot of the stuff that was built with the 1995 renovation of the library, those are the things that are starting to come up in need of replacement. The emergency generator is now 25 years old, and it's all about reliability, and that one is, we're concerned that it's not going to pass tests. So that's why that one, from a safety standpoint, there's a lot of other things, the fire alarm system in future years. The elevators were basically, the next 3 years after 21, but you can see that that's the only thing in the library right now that is immediately needing, aside from what Mr. Urban's going to talk about. So that's the libraries. If you have any questions, happy to answer that. Jeff and Russ and I have talked enough, so I can speak to that one. Otherwise, Brad can get started with his stuff.
So all the projects that you see here are all in our strategic plan, and they're all geared toward that museum centennial in 2024. And then looking a little bit farther toward the country's 250th birthday in 2026. But the one thing that we have next year is we want to get started on design development and media development for our next big long-term exhibit, which is called Deep Roots Growing City. It's a very complex exhibit, has a lot of elements in there. It's going to take us really 2 years of development to get that exhibit prepared for fabrication, which we would propose fabricating and opening in 2023, and just before our centennial. It's a big exhibit, so it takes a lot of time to do, very complex. And then we have some other projects in there which are, in some ways, they're maintenance projects, like about every 25 years or so, the exterior of the building, the masonry exterior has to be tuck pointed and sealed and all that maintenance work. And the last time we did that was in the late 90s. Same with the woodwork, that's got to get done periodically, so we have exterior painting in there, and then some other minor things like elevator upgrades and security cameras, that sort of thing. The one big project is is building modifications. I'll tell you, the 800,000 that you see in there in 2023 is really just a guess. This is not the big project to expand the entrance and to modify the building. This is more like a holding project. That $800,000 is just based on projection, based on some estimates that we had gotten in 2014. So it's really not the big project that we just completed design development for. It's really just a holding project to take care of some of the more pressing building inefficiencies and some ADA issues and that sort of thing. So that's just a quick overview. I'd be any questions that you might have.
If not, then Mr. Urban and Mr. Fitzpatrick can come up and talk about general building.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
John and John, where do you want to start?
Well, ours are a little bit of a hodgepodge, so we have them in a variety of areas. So maybe it might be helpful just to point out where they are, and then council can decide, what questions you may have, based on identifying them. I hate to go point by point, but we don't have too many of those. So if that's okay with the council. So the first one, I think the chief touched on, is on page 2, the renovations to the vacant office space at the PD. So he's already covered that, unless you have additional questions. The next one's on the next several are on page 3 under general building and equipment. There's office furniture replacement, HVAC roofing replacement, and an ADA audit of all city buildings. So the HVAC roofing and furniture are kind of an annual thing. And for those council members that have been here a while, it's kind of like we operate it kind of like a sinking fund. So City Manager Roloff, that's something that he introduced when he first got here. We knew we had annual costs, and we were able to go back and take a look at how much we spent. So we set aside an amount, and then John works with all the departments to try to determine what their needs are from a roofing and HVAC perspective, and also office furniture. And then he works with them, and we have a prioritization system, based on the severity of all the circumstances. And I think that's been working really well. I think the other departments like the fact that their projects are getting addressed. We're looking at it comprehensively. We're addressing them in a manner of which items are most severe. And I think it really helps for us from a planning perspective too, in terms of replacement and budgeting and all those things. So I think that was a good addition and a good idea when City Manager Roloff came here, and it's been pretty successful.
Do we use that full amount every year?
Yeah. John?
Yeah, and I can go through just to give you a little highlight of just some of the projects for not only this year, but also for 2021. But as John said, we work with 2 different consultants, engineers, to help us kind of prioritize the projects as we go. We work with McMahon for the HVAC, and we work with SEG for the roofing. And as far as 2020 goes, in terms of priority, we're already working on a variety of HVAC improvements at the fire stations, 15 through 19. That started already. We replaced the compressor at the safety building. That was an emergency replacement there that controls all the VAV boxes throughout the building. We've got slated, we've engaged McMahon to now help us with the several other HVAC projects this year. We have to replace the boilers at the safety building. Those are in dire need. We never did replace the second boiler at the city hall. That's coming up this fall, as well as the chiller pumps. Those are in dire need. We're also right now going to be replacing the mixing boxes over at the safety building and the police department side right now. Those are 20-some years old, and they're just giving problems for the temperature control throughout the building on the police department side. So we're going to take that on this year. And then if we get competitive bids, our goal is to address the roof of Fire Station 18 over on Murdoch. We've been fixing that for the last couple of years, and it's been holding, but as Chief Stanley can attest, it's just got to get replaced. So that's on hopefully we'll try to get to that this year. Otherwise, it'll be the top of the list for 2021. Then looking at 2021, in addition to the air handler units at the convention center, which is later on in the program, the roof at the senior center south, that's circa 1994. That's original to the south building. That's had some ongoing issues that we can't ignore any longer, and we've done patching, but there's only so much you can do there. The senior center south furnace replacements, those, everything's coming due. That building, 1993, 94, those furnaces are coming up. Those got to be replaced. And then senior center north, they have an HVAC unit on the roof that we've been fixing over the last couple of years, but it's a 1998 unit, and it's just seen its time, so that's on our list. And then we're back to hopefully being able to fix some of the VAV boxes that mix the air here in City Hall. As you may be very well aware, the mixing boxes are pneumatic now, and they're just getting to the point that they're just not working like they should, and it's just not making for an efficient system. So we're hopefully going to be able to get back to replacing those. So both with the HVAC and the roofing, it's a moving target. We work with the engineers to identify, replacement items based on age, condition, and so forth. But sometimes you can't predict what's going to happen throughout the course of the year, and things get moved up and so forth. So.
And I would just add, I think, if we are, sometimes we're successful in terms of securing some of these repairs in a manner where they're less costly than we project. And by having this hierarchy already established, then we're able to, if necessary, move some of those projects in. If something becomes more serious than we anticipated, we can kind of adapt pretty quickly. So it works pretty well. And in this model that City Manager Roloff established, we've also extended the theory of that to the Grand Opera House and also the Convention Center. So working with our partners there, we've talked to them about this concept, and I think they've accepted that, and they understand that we need to go through this process in a methodical way, and that the council has a lot of difficult decisions, and we want to try to plan in advance. So they've kind of embraced this idea. And then I guess the last plug I'll put in for this kind of methodology is I think City Manager Roloff and also Finance Director Van Gompel are in a way applying some of the larger facility items that they all talked to you initially, with this same concept of kind of adding that little margin on top of the borrowing, the $3 million roughly on top of the 12, and then we can hopefully try to chip away at some of these things so they just don't get backed up and then become more costly. So those are really the thoughts associated with these.
Could I just go back to the ADA audit?
Yes.
I seem to recall that when we did the City Hall study, a significant portion of the suggested renovations related to ADA. Did we not do an ADA audit during that process?
We didn't do a comprehensive audit of all of our buildings, and that's really what this would be.
Okay.
We studied a model that one of our partners has done in the Valley, the city of Neenah. So we took a look at their ADA audit, and I think it's something that's really necessary for our organization in order for us to make sure that we're addressing the things that we need to, especially since we're kind of foraying and the council's giving us this opportunity and maybe hope to address some of these facility issues. We never really thought that was going to be possible in the past, and I just think it's prudent for us to plan for the ADA concerns along with all the other building concerns so we can, make sure that that meshes appropriately. And, I know the council's also been talking about a lot of important issues related to DEI and, ADAs and needs for individuals certainly are in concert with that dialogue as well.
You mentioned HVAC and roofing, and obviously the program that we use, and
Yep.
and I like how we do that, and how it ties in. Because you mentioned it, you didn't hit it hard enough, but I think you mentioned it where it touches on with the money spent for, or potentially spent for, a new parks building, and how the money we've been spending on that building over the last 1, 2, and 5 years, and then if we don't do something, the money we're going to spend in the next 1, 2, and 5 years. I think in the fall, either Mr. Maurer and yourself possibly shared with council a rough estimate of what that building might need in the next 5 years. It may have been even a shorter window, but if you can come across that again and maybe share that with council, it may be appropriate to just remind us of what the expense outlay might just be on that one individual building.
Yeah, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but yeah, I do recall what you were.
Yeah, just so, I didn't expect it tonight, just dropping it on you now, but maybe just remind us of.
And actually, I know he mentioned city manager and I when he was first hired, and we took him past that building, but, John was involved when we made arrangements to try to centralize some of their activity in that building, and everything he said about it being, the concept was for it to be a temporary circumstance is true. So if there are any more questions about that section, then the next area, and I touched on these just before, there are two areas on page 6 under Grand Opera House. And I guess I can try to clarify this, Russ, if that's okay, in terms of the signage. So we have the signage listed in there, the Grand Opera House, and this is part of the dialogue that took place kind of in conjunction with the new contract that the council recently approved with the Grand Opera House Inc. And so they've been working to try to facilitate kind of in-kind naming rights at the Grand Opera House as a way for them to secure additional funding. They also understand, because we've talked to them, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that when they're in a CIP situation, they're competing with very difficult types of projects. I know the council talked about the scoring system. City manager Roloff tried to explain how difficult it is for some projects to really get any kind of meaningful score. And so they very well understand now that, when they're up against a project that is maybe life safety or something like that, it's really tough for them to get any traction. So with that thought in mind, they thought that it would be in their best interest to try to chip in, to try to defray some of the cost as a way for the council to receive that as a good faith effort on their part, and that in the hope that some of the projects would be have a better chance to be approved going forward. So this first item is a really great example of that, the Grand Opera House signage. They've worked with Festival Foods, I believe, and they've been able to secure the entire $75,000 that's going to be necessary for them to place a new sign on the outside of the Grand. So although it's in here as a placeholder, it's not going to be an expenditure that we'll need to move forward. So hopefully
Shows an offsetting revenue. If you look at the funding sources, donations, it's fully funded.
Right. So that's really what this is.
And they're working towards that in 2020, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
By the time we do the budget, you may not even see this.
Right. So just a little kind of a unique circumstance there. Stage floor replacement, that's something that City Manager Roloff is, seen fit to move forward. It's an issue that we want to make sure is safe for everybody that's working and performing in there. So I know that was a concern that was
And
expressed.
Part of that, if you recall from the agreement, the Grand is going to be taking a portion of donations that they get, and they're going to be putting it in the community foundation. And the other offsetting revenue under the donations areas, they're gonna fund 10,000 of this $35,000. It's not everything, it's, it's a little over a quarter of the project cost, but I think that's the intent of that fund, is if they get sponsorships, or sponsorships, if they get sponsorships, they're gonna put a portion of it into this fund, and it'll be used kind of like what the fund over at the Community Foundation exists for the convention center. We have a fund that we send some monies over there out of room tax, and when something comes up, we use those funds. Sometimes they sit for several years, and we hope they can build a nice war chest of things, because they have a long list. Mr. Urban has put together with them a long list of improvements that are going to be necessary over the term of the contract, next 10 years. And we've suggested that some of these projects that are maybe a little more discretionary, such as the signs, should get donations funded. The floor of the Grand, that's part and parcel to the whole facility. You don't have a stage, you don't have a facility. So we feel we should be part of it, but they demonstrate their commitment to doing this by putting some money in as well.
Right, I think they've, during the last contract cycle, the council had some ideas that they wanted to see the Grand Inc. embrace, and they work really hard at that. I think they've really listened to our suggestions in terms of trying to, understand how difficult it is for the council to make these calls. So they're doing these things as a good faith effort, and we certainly appreciate that.
And I like that there's a partnership there. That
Absolutely.
Yep. It's buy-in from both sides. We've talked about that in numerous years and numerous different types of projects. That it's not necessarily public-private partnership on this one, but it's as close as we can kind of get. So
Absolutely. Well, the last item there is just the air handler unit in the convention center. That's something that has been problematic for quite some time. It's been a noise concern for the convention center, and this is the final replacement of that. Do you want to expand on that, John, a little bit?
Well, as you said, this is an item that we had on the agenda for many, many years. The problem was they weren't broken, they were just loud, and so we've done some Band-Aids over the years with various insulation and whatnot, but when we did the review with the convention center staff, I should say the hotel operator staff, when we did our priority review as part of that lease renewal, this was an item that they put high up on their list, and so City Manager Roloff included this in our list of items for the state trust fund loan that was incorporated as part of this. So this is certainly something they'll be very happy to see being replaced in the coming year. They're 30 years old. They're just loud.
And that's really all we have for this coming year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
sounds good. Thank you. Thank you.
At this time, we're 2 hours in, and it's been requested we take a break. It's a good breaking point, and then we can finish up with Public Works and all that wonderfulness.
Wonderful.
5 minutes? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That's
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly.
Stagecoach Bandit colleague here, Travis Hildebrand. He is our Mechanics Division Manager. I just wanted to start out by asking if there were any questions on any of the vehicles that were listed in that equipment area. Travis is obviously, as a mechanics manager, he's our expert on all of the vehicles and all of their needs, and helps us rank and prioritize which vehicle goes where in the CIP. So I thought I'd kind of start there and build upon some of the rest of the vehicles in the department.
All right, is that starting on page 3, James?
Yes.
Yes, on page 3, continuing on in general building and equipment, the things that Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Urban talked about. But then you'll also see a number of vehicles in there. E&G number 389 is a vehicle for engineering division. Then all the STRs are vehicles for streets division. And then that, continues out throughout the rest of the years as well.
And generally, we've been borrowing about $500,000 plus or minus $100,000 annually for equipment. That's just sort of a running average that we've done. And it says $1,241,000, but that includes the HVAC and those things. So it's still in that neighborhood. But our plow trucks are in need, and our motor grader is probably the biggest one that stands out, because our motor grader generally has a pretty good life. And Travis can give you all sorts of details about each and every piece of equipment, but the idea is we try to get that $500,000 or so and basically ask Travis to give us his highest priorities based on the service records that he maintains.
And one of the things, I heard earlier was the ask for the more detailed sheets that you've historically seen on many of the other projects. You have historically not seen detailed sheets on any of the vehicles or equipment. That will be one difference. This year there are more detailed sheets, but as Mr. Van Gompel pointed out, that means we certainly would prefer to give that to you electronically versus printing several volumes like this for the 5-year plan of all those detailed sheets. But there are detailed sheets for each of the vehicles that we were able to generate using the new software this year. And that gave Travis a much better opportunity to tell more about the vehicle's usage, how we use it to serve our residents, and also some of the mechanical issues that they've had. I know on a lot of the vehicles, Travis likes to compare them to its compatriots. So all the tandem axle plow trucks, there'll be an average cost per mile of maintenance of all the vehicles, and then you'll look at it and you'll see the ones that we've chosen. I think the single axle in particular, the average is about $2.50 a mile, but the vehicle we're proposing is about $4.50 a mile. So that's some of the things that Travis really helps us to be able to prioritize and pick out those vehicles. And that's kind of why I asked him here tonight to, if you had any questions on any specific vehicles. Pretty much off the top of his head, he could probably tell you when they changed the oil on every vehicle in the last 2 years, so.
I will correct one thing I stated. I apologize. I was running into my office to see what the number was. It's $500,000 for equipment, but it's $3 million annually for vehicles. And that includes not just public works vehicles, that includes all vehicles, including fire apparatus and things of that nature. The only thing it probably doesn't cover are squad cars, because the shelf life of the squad cars are so short. That's in the operating budget, and you'll get that in October. I apologize for that.
I just had a
Travis was
question
probably
on
trying to
the,
figure it out.
sorry, side load refuge trucks there. Didn't we just get those like within the last 10 years?
Yes, what we're seeing, in particular, the side load recycling and the garbage trucks, we are seeing less than a 10-year life on those. There are 2 side load refuse trucks in the 2020 CIP, and these 2 that have been proposed in the 2021 CIP. Our goal would be to issue a bid for all 4 vehicles at once in order to be able to get better pricing on the overall package.
So wasn't, and you may not have been here, I don't know, wasn't part of the discussion when we got those that the cost or the benefit of that investment, and maybe Mr. Earl, if you can address this, that it was going to reduce, it was going to have a longer life, and it was going to reduce like our workers' comp?
It certainly does, and it's cut our workforce tremendously. Instead of needing 3 people on every vehicle, we are now at 1 person per vehicle. With all the rear load vehicles, there were 3 people on every vehicle, 1 driving and 2 riding the back for all of the collections. Now with all the side loaders for both the recycling and the sanitation, we're at 1 person per vehicle. So, that's a 2/3 reduction in staffing requirements. Also, because it is all operated from within the cab and they're not getting out and picking garbage and things, certainly there's been a reduction in workers' comp. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I would have to talk to Mr. Greeninger to get that. But you're not physically going out there and manhandling all of that garbage.
They're just not seeing as long a life as we had hoped.
I think we had initially thought on the refuse side that we would probably see 10 to 12. That's not where we're at right now. This is just the first go around. This is the initial fleet yet, right, Travis?
Correct. Yep.
So there are certainly some things we're still learning, but one of the things that we're finding right now is we're not quite seeing as much life as we thought initially, but we are still seeing all of those other benefits.
Thank you.
I believe these trucks were put into service in the fall of 2012. So by the time they get ordered and with the lead times involved, it'll be 10 years before we see a replacement on these, I believe.
Yeah, these lead times on these vehicles from award have generally been 6 to 12 months at least.
Yeah, closer to 12 to 13 at this point on the latest one.
There may be an opportunity to negotiate with Oshkosh Corporation on some of these things, and so I'll be bringing forward that James and I met to talk about different things, Travis, Kevin Ewan, and just taking a look at what options might be there. So
Haven't they invented like a combination garbage truck, snow plow, like wash your dishes kind of multi-vehicle yet?
It's a race car as well.
Oh.
Yeah, and the recycling trucks, we've been paying cash on those because early on we knew that one, because of the glass and things like that, that really
that recycling fund being separate and with all the revenue, all the funding coming from the revenue on the recycling side. But yeah, that's established an equipment replacement fund on the recycling side because we knew up front we were not going to see that life.
And over the course of the 7 to 10 year life on these trucks, the packer and the garbage truck arm gets rebuilt 2 to 3 times. So I mean, even though they have that much of a life, it's a high maintenance unit just in general because of the life it leads. A lot of cycles. You dump 800 carts a day, and that packer works 2,400 times, packing 3 times per stop. It's a lot of moving parts.
So that
Okay,
kind
and-
of covers recycling and sanitation. at the same
Recycling and
time.
sanitation and, I think streets division. The only other thing would be if there was any question on any of the utility vehicles. Travis is kind of my expert on those as well. I think if you flip starting on page 6, let's see, water filtration or water, I don't see, maybe a van, a couple of things for water distribution, wastewater. Do we have any vehicles in wastewater? It's either I take my glasses all the way on or all the way off here.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of vehicles in sewer.
Yeah,
And there's a-
wastewater only has the pickup in 2022.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, yeah.
Mower and, I mean, pretty minor stuff on the sewer side in terms of,
Yeah, and even from,
Hippos.
even from stormwater, we've got some street sweepers a little bit later out and a lawnmower coming up this
Yeah.
coming year.
So if
there aren't a ton of vehicles there.
so if there's no questions about equipment, we could probably say thank you to Travis.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks,
Probably.
Travis.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for hanging out with us. I think with that, I'll ask, as Travis packs up, I'll ask Steve to come up and join me. Unfortunately, Mr. Gierock, our engineering division manager, city engineer, is not able to attend with us today. He was having some surgery earlier today, so he will be out for a few weeks. So Steve is stepping in to help me with not only the street projects that engineering manages, but also all of the utility projects. So that will take us the rest of the way through the project portion of the agenda, at least. So I think
James, just out of curiosity, usually this time you're able to show us like on the map. And I was just looking at like, utility infrastructure and some of the street. Are we gonna have the opportunity to see that on the map?
yeah, I think Russ is going to see if he can pull up our city
did.
website, maybe. The dashboard that we implemented, I believe, 2 years ago now for the capital improvements program. The current dashboard that's on the city website is for the current CIP, the 2020 to 2024. Staff are currently working on taking what is in this proposed 21 to 25 CIP and getting a second version up for the proposed CIP so that you can see what's in the currently approved one as well as what is in the proposed one. So then after everything is adopted later this year, then we would kind of swap that out and just have the one approved version on there. If you want, click there you go, Russ. And the dashboard's right there on top. The interactive map.
All right.
But you're saying the proposed 2021
Thanks
is
for remembering
not
that.
fully in there.
No, the version that's currently on the interactive map is the 2020 to 2024, as you could see in the upper left corner there. Staff is currently working on getting this version implemented of this proposed one. So we would hope to have that in place as we look to hold our informational meeting for the residents. This year, with everything that's going on, from the health pandemic standpoint, we're going to hold our neighborhood meeting a little bit differently than in past years. I will be working with Oshkosh Media Services to record the presentation that we would normally give, have that available on their YouTube channel. Information technology has assisted us with creating a general departmental email address that people can email us questions to, and that our management staff and our administrative assistant can help us keep answering those questions as they come in. We'll also be posting a Q&A on the CIP page as well. So the preliminary dashboard, as well as the presentation, the video, and the Q&A will all show up on the CIP page of the city's website. But
Very nice.
that'll be coming here in the next couple of weeks. After we get done here tonight, I'm going on vacation for a few days, so it'll be late next week before I can meet with media services again to kind of start planning that stage of it out.
But you can see on this.
Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilmember Allison Osby, are you able to see that okay?
Just, I couldn't at first, but now I can see it.
You see it? Okay. But I mean, are you able to see it like meaningfully? It's not micro small?
No, actually, I've got it up kind of on the larger screen, so it's very visible, and I can definitely see it's good information.
Yeah, and this map is very interactive. You know, you could zoom in and all the information all the way around the outside updates to wherever you're zoomed in on the map. You know, as you can see, you know, as Russ zooms in, all the bar charts and everything are changing. The charts are also clickable. So, say for example, if you just clicked on in the bottom panel, if you click on the 2021 chart. That will turn off everything else in all the other years and only show you the 2021 stuff. And again, only that is currently in the display screen. So this is a very interactive tool that can that helps our residents and property owners be able to kind of navigate through what is in the CIP. And then you can also click on projects to get all of the information that appears in the data sheets. So 2021, let's see what's 9th Avenue. So if you were to pan a little bit west, Russ, and a little bit south, there, that red line on 9th Avenue. So if you were to click on that, a little information box pops up and you can scroll through that, and it's got all the cost estimate information down below. And so all of the information that you will see on the detail sheets that you will be getting is all contained right here in this interactive map tool.
Very nice.
And this is also summarized on page 3, the big projects that we've got proposed for 2021 and beyond. This only shows 5 years, but James and Steve and Justin are putting in up to 10 years worth of projects so that we can, because everybody's interested in when their street is getting done, and we like to have that information, and I think the new software gives us that additional capability over and above what we're showing here. If we could do 10 years here, but it would just be a big blob. So we keep it to 5 to make it more easily readable. But you can see the big ones next year, year 3 of 5 for Oregon Street, then CP, Amro Road, a smaller project, and then West 9th, which is a big one, which we've been talking about recently because of what the street profile is going to look like.
Well, if I wanted to look at, for example, Central Street reconstruction or Bayshore Drive reconstruction that are a couple of years out, I'm able to select the year and find that project in there?
Certainly,
or?
you could, if you just click back on the 2021, Russ, that'll turn that filter off and it'll put all the projects back in. So if you know where, you know, for example, Bayshore, well, we know where Bayshore is, so you could scroll over there on the
You're
map.
not going
And
to test me, are you?
no, I'm not going to test you, Russ. It would be a little bit off the upper right corner of the screen right now, Russ, is where it would be there. So that short red line right there by the railroad, that one right there. So if you were to click on that one, the data map will update and it'll tell you, you know, what year, you know, what the scores were, what all the estimates are. So again, this is, you know, the current 2020 to 2024, but when we update the draft,
We need to bump Bayshore back a year.
yes. So when we update, you know, this preliminary CIP with the new interactive map, that will all be updated to show what is in the documents that you'll be receiving.
Okay, because that said 2019 and this says 2025.
Yeah, I think what James was saying is this particular module has not been updated with the 2021.
Yes, this data that you received from Russ last week is not yet updated on the interactive
I'm sorry,
map.
I didn't catch that.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
I think what you saw, and I saw the same thing, it's when it was last entered, so we haven't updated that project since 2019. It was proposed here for, was it 2024?
Which one?
That one.
Bayshore, because this is a 2020 to 2024, 2022. So it was originally proposed for 22, now we're bumping it back to 25.
And I see, because, you know, the first thing is I'm seeing 2 streets that have been or utility areas, but it doesn't say like where. And so it's like, wait a minute, we just did those. So are these like other sections that didn't get
Which
done?
ones are you referring to?
Like Central Street reconstruction. They had those great big, like, humongous.
Right, these,
culverts that went
the
in.
Central Street that's in, this current version of the CIP is from New York going north to
Okay,
Nevada.
that's what I was
So
wondering,
it's-
if these are sections that didn't
Yes,
get
they're,
finished off.
they are different sections. When you get the actual detailed sheets,
Yep.
it actually lists all of the limits right on those detail sheets.
Okay.
Again, in an effort to keep a summary report truly that, just a summary,
Yes,
you
of
gotta
course.
strip some things down.
Yeah.
Uh,
If we could, the public can access this right now and that? And the public can access both this and that online?
I'm not sure.
That's not online yet,
Okay?
but we can get it online.
What about the detail?
Those are not online yet either.
This is online, but this is the old one. We wanted.
So how would we access the detail if we wanted it?
As Russ said, he will be getting it to you, and then we will be getting it on the website as well. We'd been working on some updates all the way through the time that Russ printed these to send to you last week. So the process for printing all of the detail sheets is a little bit longer than just running the summary reports.
And I don't know if anybody's asking for the printed. Are you, Deb?
Well, Councilmember Mughal asked for it
you
earlier
ask for it
tonight,
printed?
and we're prepared to do the detail sheets for the 21 projects.
Well, what I'm saying, not printing actual pieces of paper, but the process of printing the detailed sheets out of the database.
Oh, exporting.
Yes.
Okay.
Not printing them to paper, but printing them to a PDF. So, it's a little more cumbersome than just running the summary report,
Yes.
which can be
Yes.
done with a couple
Yep.
of clicks.
Yep.
So that's why all of the detailed information is not out there yet, but it will be soon.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up a point that you brought to my mind with your question about Central Street. Central Street, or Bay Shore is originally proposed for 22. Central is one of those things where right now it's proposed for 24. If something happens with Merrill School, with the school referendum, we're gonna think about that in terms of how does that fit in, just like we did with Washington Avenue and the YMCA. We did that to coordinate with them, so we don't get too locked in, we don't fall in love with these projects for a specific year. Bay Shore was pushed back primarily, and you can take this back to your friends at the university, Councilmember Ford. We got Algoma in 2022, and nobody's gonna disagree that we need to do Algoma. It was really more a matter of trying to get that scheduled and programmed in, so.
It's a mile-long street from Wisconsin to Congress, so that is a very big project.
Monster. It's and in terms of everything, so.
And it's really rough if you drive over it right now, too.
Yes, it is. I drive it very regularly.
Yeah, it's just, that reminds me of
Well,
everything
how
goes home.
much could we save everybody by closing that down and making it pedestrian?
You would need the fire chief to be here for that discussion. That discussion occurred when Elmwood was closed, because they need to get across town.
Sure.
And that was brought up, because Chancellor Wells at the time wanted to close, a bunch of those streets. And it's like, well, but how do we get fire apparatus onto campus? How do we get fire apparatus through the campus when Station 17 is occupied somewhere else in town? Station 15 would have to respond. We still need a way through. So it's like, it's Elmwood or it's Algoma. You got to pick which one you want. And ultimately, they picked Elmwood to close. But again, thanks for the question, because that's probably a history lesson that predates you, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, those are the things that we look into. The Chancellor Wells at the time envisioned this sort of a northeast-southwest pedestrian mall through the campus, but there would still need to be crossing. So Elmwood seemed to be the one that.
Just saying.
Yeah.
It's a
No,
big project.
Yep,
It
it
is.
is a huge project.
But yeah, so I mean, just as city manager indicated, continuing year 3 of the Oregon Street Interceptor project. At this point, it becomes not so much a street reconstruction project as it does become an interceptor sewer project with some street patching and some other utility work. We are looking at potentially needing to reconstruct the bridge just north of Walcott Avenue as well. CP Avenue and West 9th Avenue, I think, you know, we've been talking about those for several years. The Amara Road project, the city manager indicated it's a small project. In totality, it's not a small project. It's a very large project. It's just mostly in the town of Algoma. The town of Algoma has submitted that project and received state federal funding through the STP Urban program for that project. The recently appointed town administrator approached me for doing a cost share on the city portion of that street because from 200 feet west of West Haven Drive to the Brooks Lane, half of that street is in the city limits. So this portion is for just the city's portion of that part of the street. So, and that is currently programmed through the DOT to be constructed in 2021. So that's, unfortunately, the previous administrators had not approached me, so we had to kind of try to fit that one in because that's kind of where the state's planning that one to be done.
So those are big street projects. There's also, I neglected to bring these up, traffic stuff. The parking lot improvements is this is on page 5. This will give James, why don't you guys can get ready for
the
utilities.
Well, the parking lot improvements project, you know, that's one that we assist Mr. Collins with. You know, he has been working with Jewel to do pacer analysis of all the parking lots and prioritizing parking lot reconstructions. Mr. Collins then approaches our engineering division staff to, okay, this is the project that's up, you know, what do you think it's going to take? And then our engineering division staff have been doing the design, bidding, and construction management on those projects for the past about 3 years now.
Oh gosh, more than that.
And I'm sorry, which parking lots are we talking about?
These are all general parking lots. This is sort of the same thing like we talked about earlier with HVAC.
The roofing and that.
It's basically an
Okay.
allowance that we set aside, and the question, so one of the two of you raised it, you know, how do you know, how much do you spend it? We have a long list of projects. Station 18 was mentioned about roofing. It also needs a parking lot. So those are some of the ones.
This current year, the 10th Avenue gravel parking lot
Yeah.
is being paved. I know we've been working with both Mr. Collins and Mr. Maurer to start planning for an engineering study to look at what can be done with the Red Arrow Park parking lot. That will be an extremely challenging project since that parking lot is built on garbage. So we're looking at what we may need to do there as well. It's kind of been put off for several years just because of knowing it was going to be a very large undertaking, so we've been working on a lot of other parking lots.
Just curiously, this week, it was mentioned by a business owner and a member of the bid that the east side of the 400 parking lot swale,
The bioswale?
bioswale, that those areas are starting to look their age and losing some of that, you know.
We've been starting to
fresh
talk about
look.
what needs to be done to some of those facilities and kind of working out whose responsibility that is. So
Okay.
we have you know, started having those conversations this year to try to work through some of those things.
When you say whose responsibility, you mean within departments or outside of city?
All of the above.
Okay.
You know, whether that
Okay.
is a bid responsibility or a city responsibility, and you know, those types of things. So we're needing to work through that yet.
Sure. So like over along Jackson Street, where the old drugstore, it's now Aurora, and we have some of those also, those bioswales. Is that considered private maintenance, or does the city maintain that?
I believe those are all part of the private site. I believe there's agreements on site because that's private property on those.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I know that was, as some of the property transfers were taking place with merge, those were some of the agreements that were being updated, was the actual operation and maintenance of those stormwater facilities.
Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off in the detail there, but it was timely.
Yeah.
The question came up.
So those are the big ones with traffic. The other ones are really more just replacement programs, small replacement programs. We have a lot of them are for cars hitting it, and we get that back through insurance if we can. So that kind of summarizes traffic. They have a few vehicles. Again, those vehicles are probably 15 years old or so, or at least we're looking at least a 15-year life out of it. So that's traffic. I forgot to bring that up when Steve was here. Utilities are probably next.
Yeah, I think looks like we'll start with water. Mr. Van Gompel mentioned the Clearwell project earlier in the night. That is a project that has been kind of delayed due to working through technical issues with the regulatory agencies. We had approval from the Department of Natural Resources, but the PSC, the Public Service Commission, asked for a lot more detail and a lot of additional information, so we've been continuing to work with them. We believe we've got things sorted out with them, but in the past 3 years since the plans and specs were finished, there have been a lot of building code changes, so we need to redo some design efforts to be in compliance with current building codes. So we are working with our design consultant to kind of get that scope of effort put together and get that process moving forward so we can get those plans and specs done and get that project moving forward. As we mentioned earlier, it was $10 million impact in the 2021 CIP, but the total project is a little over $20 million. So that would be not borrowed through bonds, but that would be financed through the Department of Natural Resources Safe Drinking Water Loan Program. So in that case, during construction, you pay the contractor and you submit a reimbursement. You pay the contractor, you submit a reimbursement. So and you make interest-only payments during that time frame, so you don't actually have, the entire financing in place until the project is complete, which is beneficial because from the Public Service Commission side of things, you can't include it in your rates until it's in service, and so there's a lot of interesting challenges that go along with that, especially on such a large-scale multi-year project.
And just to throw on top of that, just so you don't remember the $20 or $22 million when we open the bids, we're also looking at combining replacing the liquid oxygen system and the ozone generator replacement projects in with that project because they are going to be impacting the systems between those, so they will likely be bid as one package. So we're looking at an even overall bigger bid package to do that as we combine these projects together and try to take advantage of some ability to have one contractor on site manage the project and not have to have them tripping over each other, and then take advantage of hopefully some cost savings and not having to have additional contractors mobilize onto the site.
Yeah, anytime you can minimize the number of interests in a site is advantageous. So you have one general that manages all of the subs, and he can say, okay, sub A, you'll be here for these days, sub B, you'll be here for these days, not three contractors showing up at the same time and then coming to us saying, hey, I can't work, you got to pay me downtime. So that's why you want to combine projects of this magnitude as much as possible.
But we're still awaiting PSC.
We've got to get some design updates done so we can resubmit to PSC.
We're getting closer, but it's...
Are we gonna get our lifeline rate analysis with that?
Oh, that'll predate. The lifeline analysis is totally separate from this. We don't have to wait that long. PSC is looking at this project independent of all that other stuff.
Rate analyses are handled by a completely separate department or group of people at the Public Service Commission. You have some overlap, but this is a construction authorization application that requires PSC approval. So that is a completely they're completely separate items to be dealt with.
I hear you, but
the good news is it
contributes to the overall though. So.
We'll hear on the lifeline stuff before this. Wouldn't you say, Russ?
I thought we were going to have that in July.
Yep, was
okay.
That's what I recall too, but it wasn't a hard and fast date promise. It was more on experience. It's normally about a 6 to 9 month process.
Yeah, and I think some of the other issue though is trying to look at the rate analysis and the basis going into the rate case of our projects And so they're trying to time it so that we do this all at one time and take all of those factors into consideration, so.
Right, I was just gonna say, if that is dependent upon what we do with this, it seems like, yeah, we would be having that all together.
Yeah, normally they take a look at the assets in place right now. James talked about
Yep. The assets have to be in service for them to be included in a rate case.
So the Clearwell project isn't gonna be allowed in the rate case until, if you look at this schedule, not until 2024 probably.
The upside of that with the Clearwell project, it will probably be about half in service at about the 2/3 point of the project, because we currently have 3 existing Clearwells out there. 2 of them will be taken out of service while one of the new ones and the new high lift pump station are being built. So there will be a phased approach. We'll be able to phase some of it in, but it won't be fully in for several years.
Yeah, we're not gonna wait for the Clearwell project to get authorization. That's why I'm very comfortable. We're gonna hear on that stuff long before this Clearwell stuff.
Other things from the utility side, water main replacements. Water Distribution Division regularly comes to us with sections of water main where, the street and other utilities don't require reconstruction, but they have a significant break history. Some prime examples have been in the Murdoch, Crane, Plymouth, Roosevelt, and all of those streets up in that area have been having a difficult time, and there was a lot of water main replacement done over the past 3 years. Kind of the next one is in the Knapp Street area. It's really in the vicinity just north of the Keenest Paulus Quarry and the Quarry Park projects. So it's Knapp Street from Osborne to 18th. It's Erie, it's Florida, it's Sanders, and I think I missed one.
18th, was that in there?
18th isn't in there, but several of the other ones right in the vicinity of South Park Middle School. So they've had a lot of break history in there, but everything else just doesn't warrant a replacement yet. So we'll be doing similar to what we've done in this year. It's Meadow and Eagle from Southland to Witzel. The last 3 years, it's been up in that Murdoch area.
By Deb's house. Deb will remember that.
Right
All
in
the
front
water
of Deb's house
projects.
last year, I do believe.
Yes, indeed.
And right in front of my house the year before, so.
Equal opportunity.
So the repainting project on Washburn Water Tower,
Yes.
that I see is moved into this year.
That is full internal and external repainting, as well as adding a mixing system for water quality improvements. It's shown in the CIP, but it's not an item that can be borrowed for. PSC does not allow us to borrow money for that type of a project, but again, given the size and magnitude of the project, we wanted to include it in the CIP.
But it has to be done this year.
What's that?
But it has to be done this year.
21.
It's
I mean,
planned for
in
21.
21.
Yeah.
It is due. The interior of the tank is showing its age. We're starting to see corrosion and such on the interior that's actually storing the water that's going out into the distribution system. We need to protect the outside of the tank and everything too, so we don't see premature wear and failure on that. So it is
We
definitely
don't
time.
want a citywide waterfall, is that what you're saying?
No.
I believe this one was
Not a
last
little Dutch boy.
repainted about 30 or so years ago, right about the time the fire station was built there, was about the last time this one was repainted. And then you'll see in a subsequent year to the Furno Tower project for painting and mixing system addition as well.
And one of the issues that ended up bumping it back is it still has lead paint in it. So that increased the cost and kind of causes us a little bit of a delay in getting things moving forward.
It tells you how old it is too, when we're still talking about lead paint, so gives you a rough idea. Those are the big ones with water.
So if you've got no other questions on water, we'll certainly move right into sewer. We talked about the Oregon Street Interceptor project, the continuation of a 5-year project to get interceptor service all the way from 8th and Oregon down to Ripple in Oregon. You'll see another big sewer interceptor project in here, the Fond du Lac Road Sanitary Sewer. That was a project that we had originally planned on completing, I think, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
But then thankfully, one of our staff said, well, we should look at what this does in our sewer system model before we do this. And so we reached out to our consultant and had him run the model and went, oh, shoot, we got to wait for Oregon Street to get to 28th before we can do this project. Or we would have caused a lot more basement backups in the area around 17th and South Main. So we had to wait for Oregon Street, the Oregon Street and 28th Avenue project to get done this year before we can move forward on the Fond du Lac Road project for next year. The Fond du Lac Road project, there has been a history of basement backups in this area. We'll be replacing sanitary sewer from 28th extended all the way down to Walcott Avenue. Ironically, the same limits as Oregon Street. Yes, and on Walcott Avenue and eliminating the Walcott Avenue pump station. So this will be eliminating a pump station and reducing some operation and maintenance costs for us.
Which dump site is this referring to, the update relocation of dump site? Are we talking about?
That is, not only is that the septage hauler dump location that's located just off of Campbell Road right across from the senior center, but there's also a street sweeper dump and a jet vac dump located on Dempsey Trail right across from the former Humane Society building. The wastewater treatment plant has a lot of issues with materials, especially from the street sweepings. They get a lot of heavy metal materials and things like that that are picked up from the street sweepings. So we need to look at redoing that area. We've got a study in the CIP for this year to redo that so we can eliminate those influent issues into the wastewater treatment plant. Also, a lot of the influent valve replacements we've been working on the last few years, those have been the reason we need to do those is due to premature failure, due to all the grit that's gotten into them from this dump site location. So it's relocating that to be operationally more effective and reduce some long-term operation and maintenance on the wastewater treatment plant side, and then can get those off into a separate location. So it's kind of trying. Initially it was a very convenient location. Just unfortunately, some of the side effects of what we've been doing there, the plant has realized, and now we're like, okay, we got to do something to help the plant out a little more.
James, the other big project is that electrical unit substation replacement.
That's coming out in...
Starting a little bit in 21, it's mostly 22 and 23.
So, I can jump in with that
Yeah,
one.
I'll let you take that one, Steve. Thank you. I
Okay.
think you got a little more information on that one than I do.
So essentially, this is working on replacing all of the electrical main switchgear components, all of the control units of the primary feeds that come into the plant that were installed when the plant was last significantly rehabilitated in the mid-90s to late 90s, so 96, 97. So this equipment's getting to be, what are we at here, 25 years old, and it's what keeps the facility running. It controls the high voltage, well, I believe they call it medium voltage, 440 volt electrical
There's some
system.
4160 there yet, and
Is
that's
there?
one of the things they want to get rid of
Okay.
is the 4160 volt, because that voltage is something that is not very common anymore. That's the medium voltage, the 4160. So they want to get rid of a lot of that and upgrade that equipment that is getting difficult to repair.
Yeah, they're essentially at this point in time, they're having a hard time finding components to repair it when they do. If they can find the components, or they're having to have things special made to do it, the switch gears are old and getting outdated. So this is really a major overhaul in order to ensure that we keep the reliability of the plant and the maintainability of the plant functional when it's needed. We don't want to have the electrical system go down on the plant.
It's the guts of the plant and on the electrical side.
It's the heart of the plant, if you will. Nothing runs without electricity. Yeah, you're right, Mark. That was kind of starting with design work for 2021 and then moving into construction the following 2 years, and that has to be phased to not completely take the plant out of electrical service. So that's why it's kind of spread out over multiple years for construction.
So those are the big highlights in sewer. There's James, maybe get into storm sewer now?
Stormwater, we've got implementation on a few of the watershed studies we've got going on. Certainly the mini stormwater lateral program. As we talked about a little bit with council earlier this year, our demand and backlog had gotten so high that our first project was bid out this year, and we still had a significant backlog. We had some savings on other projects, so we're actually bidding a second project out this year. Should be going out to bids here within the next few weeks to try and get us a little more caught up on the backlog on that program. So that program has certainly become very effective and very popular at getting residents sump pump connections to deal with some backyard issues, as well as it really a lot of times stems from neighbors, sump pump discharges onto the sidewalk or into the street, causing public health and safety issues.
And this is a pretty significant benefit for the homeowner, considering they're paying very small cost and the utilities picking up a very large.
Very small.
So we're only assessing 25,000, levies picking up 25,000, and then the utilities picking up 675.
Yeah, the sump pump connection for residential properties, per direction from previous councils, is special assessed at $750. Even on a street reconstruction project, we are probably spending $3,000 to $4,000 on the mini storm lateral program. If there's not storm sewer in front of that house and we have to run storm sewer, a block to get to that, we could be actually this year we had a project, that property owner ended up wanting to delay on, but we were ready to spend $60,000 to get service to some properties. And would have recovered, probably about 4 laterals, so $2,200. So
it really encourages people to use it, and some of these issues become sources of neighbor disputes with water. This is as much a peacekeeper as is an effective water program. I mean, Steve, that's probably one thing you don't miss too much about being out of the stormwater end of things.
Oh, I still get the stormwater end of these a little bit, but yeah, no, the ability for when inspection services has to go out and issue an order for the city to be able to come forward and say, for $750, we can get you a lateral into your front yard to take care of all that wetness you've had all these years in your backyard, and the reason you're putting it in the spring, and we can keep you from having to deal with the ice on the sidewalk and all of those things. It really becomes a major, as Mark said, peacekeeping element.
Well, that was your guys. I mean, I was questioning the $750, to be honest with you, because that's really inexpensive. But I think and
it's a major increase from the $300 it was back in probably as recent as 2010. It was only $300, I believe, at that point in time.
But it's still a good program. It's very well received, and the demand is there. So people are doing it, and that's a good thing.
But there will come a time when the program won't be needed, when all of the properties, all the residential properties have storm laterals. I don't foresee it in my time with the city, but there will come a time when the program will not be needed anymore. Other than that, looking at moving forward, the Sawyer Creek watershed plan had originally called for a series of detention basins, one of which located at the West Haven Golf Course area. We were subsequently instructed not to proceed with, so we had to develop additional options to proceed forward. So we've been continuing to work with our consultants on developing a plan to replace that storage volume. I think it was about 2 years ago or so we officially mapped an area.
Probably longer than that now.
Okay, for this next detention basin. So it's looking at moving forward with getting that project in the works, so we can, I think, at that point we would be done with all the projects that have been identified in that watershed study.
So this is, it's going to be blunt, and it's more policy than it is CIP, but they are tied together. Because this is probably one of the few, this is probably the one thing that I get the most interactions on, especially with the business community. Stormwater utility, the rates, every project we do adds to the rate. It basically, the rate's going to keep going up every time we dig a hole. Are we getting anywhere close to a point where we can stop digging so many holes? I'm not talking full stoppage and stopping our, improvements to our stormwater plan. But we dig a lot of retention ponds. And we've seen some massive improvements in our water handling and our capabilities, obviously, Ninth Street in Ohio and those areas that no longer flood as they used to. Are we getting to a point where some of this stuff, some of these things, we can start dialing back in terms of the multiple millions of dollars worth of retention ponds that we're adding to that stormwater rate?
We actually have been dialing back for the last few years. There was a time shortly after Mr. Roloff got here where it was, get 2 big projects a year done. We're not trying to do that anymore. We're at, sometimes one, sometimes not even getting one major project because we're focusing so much more on the conveyance upgrades with the street reconstruction projects. Early in my time as a stormwater engineering manager, we were putting forward a $20 million CIP for stormwater. I think this one is 5. I don't remember exactly, Russ, where we were at with this one.
Total cost for stormwater for 21 is
3.5. Or way to look at it.
But that doesn't include the street reconstruction portion of it.
Right, yeah.
The 5-year program's 28 million divided by 5, so it averages 5 million a year. 5 plus.
So we have significantly pulled back from where we were 10 years ago. And again, that was in big part a recognition of, one, at that time, we needed to get a lot of work done. We've made a lot of progress, as you indicated, so we have pulled back, and again, because of trying to control those rate increases a little more. So we have been pulling back significantly from where we were 10 years ago.
And a little tongue-in-cheek with it. Yes, we're going to be able to dial back on the detention basins because we're going to have to start focusing elsewhere on these now. As James mentioned, some of the conveyance systems. We've got some very significant conveyance systems upgrades that are going to be needed in the Stringham Creek watershed. There are some smaller detention basins that are in the plan to do that, but again, much smaller, more local, so they're not going to be this $5 million construction type. As we're branching out and getting into some of the watersheds that are actually extending beyond the developed limits of the city, we're actually needing to kind of change our thought process and our development plans because we're potentially looking at needing to map greenways and different things like that to preserve areas that can flood versus needing to construct. So those are some of the things that we're starting to see a shift in our gears as we're getting out of the, okay, we've kind of fixed some of the major developed, fully urbanized areas, or where we have just too much water getting to that urbanized area. Now we're down to the fringes, and we can start looking at some other options that are hopefully more proactive than reactive to that point.
So would that include green infrastructure elements like exponentially in much smaller geographies, right? Like your permeable pavement, your rain gardens, your containment or zero, what do I want to say?
The utility is really not doing a lot of that. It's more working with developments and using the knowledge of the utility staff to help developments implement those types of practices.
Exactly, yes.
So yes, that's, our staff work with the developers through the site plan development process to try to incorporate that on a development by development stage. I kind of glossed over the Gladys Creek, Gallops Creek, Johnson Ave watersheds, but that goes exactly to Steve's comment about the greenways. That group of watersheds was one of those that really started that thought process for us.
But it's encouraging green infrastructure over the gray and the blue, right?
We work with the development community as they're doing projects, certainly. Our stormwater staff work with the other city staff, the parking lot projects as an example. Let's, take a look at Senior Center, fire station, what is the 9th Ave station, 16?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's got some permeable pavement systems. Design staff worked with the downtown YMCA to put in permeable pavement systems. What was the parking lot?
Menominee Nation Arena.
Otter and CP lots also had facilities. So we've been working with the other city departments as projects have been taking place to try to have a leadership role. Have a leadership role to show developers how it can be done. Even to the point like with the 10th Avenue lot, you know, from a purely code standpoint, nothing needed to be done. But, you know, again, we're going to be leaders in that and show what can be done.
Yeah.
Another way, a short way of saying it, Matt, is we have 120 watersheds in the city. When I got here, Steve, I think you and James both showed me a 35-year plan, and that was in 2008. So we've knocked off about 12 years of that plan. We're probably a year or two into it already. So we probably still have a 20-year plan, but it's to address all the watersheds. Some are real small, some of them are extremely simple solutions. Others, Sawyer Creek, massive. And we have this big project to get done in Sawyer Creek, which will probably take care of a lion's share of.
Right. You know, you mentioned other things that we have to work on. You know, certainly you've heard the talk of the TMDL from a water quality standpoint with the wastewater treatment plant. That also impacts our stormwater utility and stormwater quality as well. We are going to be faced with some very significant phosphorus reductions and some total suspended solids reductions, in particular in the Sawyer Creek watershed is the only one that's got TSS in it. So, you know, while we certainly have focused on the wastewater side of things with the TMDL and phosphorus, it does impact our stormwater utility as well.
The other item with it is the stormwater utility is a very young utility. We're still ramping debt up versus paying off debt. So once we get to a point where we start to retire some debt, we'll have a little bit more of a balance coming at that point.
Yeah, we haven't been borrowing for 20 years yet in that utility, so we haven't started.
Plateauing.
Yeah, we'll be plateauing, I think, you know, hopefully here in the next few years.
So bringing up the point where you said 120 watersheds in the city limits, right? Or in the greater area?
That count, it's about, I think the exact count's about 124, and that is watersheds that are, yes, very close, either entirely or partially within the municipal boundary.
So maybe we should change from Oshkosh on the water to Oshkosh in the water?
Well, if you know, for those of us that were here in 2008, I believe it was Oshkosh under the water, but yes.
But it shows the seriousness of it, and we still have to keep pushing ahead.
So if that's, I believe, all I've got to wrap through the rest of our department. I think, Steve, did you have any other little tidbits you wanted to throw out there?
I think the only other large project that we maybe skipped over briefly was the I&I program. That's $1 million in the sanitary sewer, where we that's an annual program where we use that to address you know, sewers that we identify as being having substantial leaks, lateral replacement programs, manhole lining, manhole replacement, just a variety of different processes that the city can take to try to reduce that clear water that's getting into the system and then overloads our wastewater treatment plant.
If you could, you know that drawing that I just love, that I think illustrates that I&I program. There's that graphic. That
I know which one you're referring to.
Yeah,
house.
It shows like
the house, yes.
Yeah, the house with all these sources of inflow and infiltration. You don't think about it, but this graphic just shows a house, and it shows whether it's in the street or coming from the house, all the sources of I&I. It really helps you understand what I&I is. So, and I don't think we've distributed that. Deb, do you remember that drawing? Oh,
I remember that.
Remember that drawing of all the sources of I&I?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's.
It's probably been a few years.
I bet it's been a few years.
We usually have it at the
Lori,
state of the
Matt,
city,
I don't know if
but
you
Yes,
guys-
I remember
remember
that.
it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's get that.
Okay.
I like talking about it. Boring person.
All right.
Thank
I've
you.
got nothing else for you right now, at least.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next steps.
Thank you, Steve.
I think we covered the project, so I don't necessarily know if we need another CIP workshop, but we certainly want to give the opportunity for council to talk about it when we have the department budgets. And then, you know, the planning document itself, we got to clean up, we got to get it published, we got to get it published online as well. And then our goal is to give it to the Plan Commission on August 18th, and then
So for council amendments or any things that council would like to submit in relation. What are we proposing as far as a time or a deadline for that? And what process do we want to see for council members that want to attempt that?
Typically, that occurs during the budget workshops, and I don't see that changing even with the new process. Russ, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, if there's something we want to talk about, that's why I left additional CIP workshop in question. We should talk about it. I would like, in concept, to have the plan itself adopted at the August 25th City Council meeting. So you wouldn't be, again, doing the legal authorization to borrow money or to appropriate, but you'd be giving your blessing to the final plan. And I would say, if you wanted to get us something probably before it gets to the Plan Commission, or if you want to wait until after it gets to the Plan Commission and then give it to us, I could live with that, but something in advance of the August 25th meeting. And that way we can get any of the finer points included for your consideration on the 25th.
Maybe if council considers those items that they'd like to discuss further, and maybe at one of the next, maybe the next council meeting, maybe even next week, we give direction to city manager on when we'd like to meet. Maybe it could be a workshop just even before one of our August council meetings, a 30 to 45 minute.
And we do
a
have
shorter one, so we don't.
Another workshop number 2 for the 2021 early projections and a discussion on your priorities for operating budget on August 19th. So
It could happen there.
If you
Definitely
wanted to
possible.
have some additional discussion on the 19th, we could.
I just think waiting, I understand the process, authorization and those things, but if we don't talk, if we've got some changes or we want to talk about those potential changes, if we wait until after we approve the plan and then come October, November, I already know the argument I'm going to hear from several staff members, including City Manager Roloff. Well, you already approved the plan, so why are we changing it?
Yep.
I'm going to be straight up honest. That's what I'm going to hear from you.
Yeah.
So let's be honest about the process, and it's new. Let's work through it together. I think it'd be fair to do it before we adopt, because it's only fair to staff as well, I think. So.
I would just suggest maybe we put a topic on the next workshop to finalize or ask for any additional comments on the CIP as part of that work session on the 19th.
Sounds good to me.
Works for me.
So then we could go back to because I wasn't really ready for us to start playing with scenarios at the beginning until after we kind of started seeing some of this. So maybe we have that opportunity to go back and.
Russ enjoys that spreadsheet.
Unless you want me to pull it up now.
I think we're
at the eye glazing stage.
Can I ask? There's Deb Chapman, and I don't want to cut you off. So if I just have one more question.
Yeah.
I've never asked this question before, but I'd like to ask it, and it may be that Lynn has to chime in from legal. But so this goes to Plan Commission for their review and blessing. What is Plan Commission's purview when it comes to the CIP and approving it or recommending its approval? What is their role in the process?
Their role is exclusively to comment on its consistency with our comprehensive plan. Nothing more. They're not like, if they have an opinion on, I like this project or that project, they can certainly pass it on to you as a council member, but it's really to say, this is consistent with our plan. If there was a project to say extend utilities, 3 miles west on 9th, it's like, that's not in our growth area, why would you do it? That type of thing. It's a limited role, and I believe because of the way we do the process, you're not going to have that dilemma, but somebody, the Plan Commission's role is very limited, and that's been reminded of them. And you probably, I got 3 Plan Commissioners, current and former. that's really the purpose of it.
Okay, appreciate that. I just asked because there has been, and it's been other discussions, but there's been a significant change over in Planning Commission over the last, 2 to 3 years. Just a reminder of their role in the process.
Yeah, the
for
questions you
pro-
raise about stormwater rates, as a council member, it's entirely appropriate to raise those, the debt, but if a plan commissioner raises those issues, I think Ms. Prop said recently, sounds like you need to run for council then, because that's your purview.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, anything else?
Thank you so much.
Nope.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
Appreciate it. Russ, thank you for all the
Good night,
info.
Deb.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Nice one, Deb.